We are one. We are one. We are and we are love. For we are one. We are, and we are light. We are. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. Will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again. Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I am your host, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest today is Rachelle Anonymous. How are you, Rachelle?
Hello, I am very excited and honored and nervous to be here.
All at the same time. Look, I know how you feel, and everyone in the comments is giving you lots of love and shooting up love hearts.
I see
And
that. It's very sweet of everybody. Thank you so much.
we're all here with you, and really glad for you to be here. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey today. And well, I think in discussion, we've decided that this program is like a practical guide on how to leave the SDA church and get your name off the books. And I want to really highlight, we're not saying that people have to do that at all. I know
No.
lots of good friends who are Adventists. They've thought through they've weighed up the pros and cons. They've looked at the information and they've made a choice to stay. And that's what I support, is people using their own minds to draw their own conclusions. It's people that are sheeple that kind of, I think, needs a little bit of a shake. And but if you land on deciding to stay, that's awesome. This is really a guide today to help people who have decided they would like to leave and are a little bit unsure what to do. I receive messages every week. How do I go about leaving, Pete? And so this is probably the first ever proper practical guide that from now on I'll be able to send people this link and say, here, check this interview out, and you'll find out just exactly what to do. Now,
Or at least a rough guideline.
it's a rough guideline, yeah. But someone wrote in the comments a few weeks back that they'd requested to leave, and they took their name to they shared that request with the board of their local church, and the board said, no, we don't accept that. And they thought, oh, okay, well, that's it then.
Mm,
So we're here to sort of say, no, that's not it. It's if
not
you
supposed to
decide what you want to do, you can make that happen. So just a new thing I want to do at the start of every program as people come in is share some of the comments from the promo to this show. So often there is incredible number of comments, and like, for example, the promo to this show, how to step by step take your name off the SDA church roll, um, featuring Rachelle Anonymous, has had over 700 views and quite a few comments. And I often feel like, wow, they kind of just don't get really looked at. The comments can be quite interesting. So I thought we'd start
Mm,
off each show that I'm interviewing someone with just sharing a couple of the comments that have been in the promo to the show, if that makes sense. Um, so Maestro Aki noticed that the thumbnails are getting more and more professional looking. Thank you, Maestro. Appreciate that someone's noticed that. Peter Veach wrote, hilarious, potentially useful. Public link, please. So, Peter, if you're watching, I, I, I recommend sharing the YouTube link. John Yerma wrote, totally by accident, I discovered about 10 years ago and found out that I no longer was a member. The reason was that I hadn't attended church. That is true. However, I was interstate dealing with my parents and their illness. That didn't sit very well with me. No one made an effort to find me or ask if I was okay. I'm still not happy about that experience.
mm,
Jim Zeideveld wrote, totally agree, John. At the very least, a pastoral visit to see how things were would have been fair. Jim is now retired, but he was a pastor, and I can vouch for his skills at being someone who was very good at pastoral care. So, good point. Um, Here's another one from Jim Zeideveld that I think helps to balance out today's conversation. And in total contrast, at the same time as this interview, Esther and I, that's his partner, are liaising with the Caboolture SDA Church to get our name on their roll, even though she lives in Mongolia. Uh, Everybody in Caboolture is keen to help. So
That's great. We celebrate the balance. We celebrate, Jim, that Esther and yourself have looked into deciding to have membership, a very important part of your life decision there. There was one I wanted to finish up on, and that's Robert Stankovic, who I think lives not far from me, actually, Rachelle. And he has a ministry, kind of an Adventist apologist, evangelist, and he writes, "Really?" with big question marks, like,
I
what
saw
on earth?
that one.
What on earth are you doing, Pete? Really? You're helping people leave the church? And so I wrote back and said, "Look, Robert, I can't wait to have you on the program, and we can do a how-to step by step join the SDA church." And he's reflecting and pondering that. He's busy right now. A lot of Adventist apologists are a bit busy to come on the show, but he's busy right now. Give me some time to gather my thoughts. As the steps toward being baptized into the body of Christ, the church is a journey of building a relationship community. Good. I don't think, Robert, you need to think too much about what you've got to say. Just say what you just said in the comment in your reply. And you can just share from the heart how you became an Adventist and how you recommend it. And if people want to join, you can share what you feel the steps are. So, yeah, they're just a few of the comments that came through, and I'll be sharing some of those at the start of each show because it helps to give a bit of a chance for those who are anticipating a show to have a bit of a say as well. Did you have any thoughts on that at all, Rachelle, on those comments?
I glanced at them briefly this morning, and then it made me a bit nervous, so I stopped reading them. But I thought it was a really interesting mix of yay and why,
And
and
yes,
so interesting to see how this goes. I just wanted to comment. Moto Sapien in the comments says, "Nod your head if you're reading the comments." I'm glancing at them a little bit. Hello to everybody
yeah,
saying hello. Hello to all my favorite people that I usually chat with.
yes. There's some great conversations often going off on a tangent in the comments, and that's fine.
Mhm.
Whatever way
I
you want to
usually
engage with SDAQ&A, I'm happy. I just wanted to say one more thing about some of the comments that come through to me, which was highlighted this morning from another message I received from someone, and I think you're probably going to touch on this. It was sparked by an Adventist Today article by, I think it was, I better double check before I start saying who it was by. Yes, it was Lauren Seibold who wrote the article, and it talks about probation, the closing of probation, and how it's not really a biblical viewpoint. And I I will often say to people that are watching, and they get a bit upset about this. So the liberal, progressive, gospel Adventist, I will often say, look, real Adventism, your core teachings do teach, for example, the close of probation as being a an accurate teaching.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, you may have noticed this, Rochelle, a lot of people say, well, that's not my Adventism. I don't have to adhere to that. And I say,
Mhm.
that's great, good, I'm glad. But just try and speak openly about what your Adventism is and see what happens. And that's what really interests me. I'm not criticizing the liberal progressive stance, the revisionist stance, the gospel Adventist stance. You can take your Adventism and view it whatever way you want, but realize that the church is very effective at silencing your special view. So I wrote on that particular wall, and Lauren wrote back, and I really appreciate what he's doing, by the way. Go and check out Adventist Today, where, like sometimes you might agree, sometimes you might not, but the bulk of their material is incredibly revealing and helpful and a great resource. Anyway,
Mhm.
I wrote and I said that it's interesting that this is a church teaching that was supported, sanctioned, confirmed via Ellen White as being accurate. She says, God told her that the close of probation is a teaching. Now, a bunch of progressive Adventists wrote on that and said, we don't believe that. And I wrote to them this morning and said, why don't you come on the show and share your version of Adventism? Because I think it's a good one. Be bold. And every single one of them wrote to me quite speedily. And I like them. It's not a criticism of them. This is a criticism of how the church restricts the freedom of people's views. And each of them said, yes, each of them said, I would love to. And one of them said, but I would lose my job. So I'm like, okay, you've got this great view of your version of Adventism, but you can't share it. So I don't know. I wish, and look, one of the things I'm really pleased about having you on the program and a number of other people rising up, coming up onto the show and being willing to speak up is you guys articulate what I've just taken 5 minutes to say in 30 seconds. And so I will continue to give my verbose version of what I'm trying to say in the hope that those of you that grasp it can help me and articulate it in a briefer, more succinct way. So that's something I wanted to put out there, that this notion of the revisionist Adventist that says, hey, I'm staying to bring about some changes. Well, how can you not acknowledge that you are not allowed to truly be the Adventist you want to be?
I have a few theories on that I'm going to touch on as we go along today.
That's what I'm hoping. That is what I'm hoping.
Not quite that directly, but in relation to that.
It's as if they think they can bring about change from within, but how can you bring about change from within if you're too scared to speak about that thing that you want to change?
And I think most of us who've taken part in this program would argue that we're not opposed to seeing that change happen.
Yeah.
But there are some systemic things in the structure that's not going to allow that to happen. So we see that as futile.
See, you've said you've said it in less than 30 seconds. Well said. Yeah. In fact, I've spent a good deal of my last 4 years trying to help that special gem of Adventism emerge and shine. Des Ford, I think, grasped what that little Adventist gem could be and included Ellen White and the Sabbath and a healthy lifestyle. And I am just shocked that when I've actually turned the light on those very people that want the change and said, hey, maybe you could do more. Come on, speak up a bit. They've said to me, oh, stop hurting my feelings, stop attacking me. That's not what I'm doing. I'm saying the system itself is set up to silence you. Are you aware of that? Okay, well, there's me rambling on for a bit. So let's get to the program. And everyone's here now, so that's good. I'm going to bring onto the screen the slideshow you've organized. But also, Rachelle, do you want? I think you probably will cover this. So tell me if you will or not. But you're welcome to share a little bit about yourself and your journey. But I think that's going to actually be unpacked as you go, from my understanding.
Yeah, I was just going to give kind of a brief overview of kind of how I culminated into this presentation and actually leaving and taking my name off the books and all of that. It's been 10 years in the making. So, but just kind of a brief summary of my Adventist experience. I was born into the church, raised in the church. I attended an Adventist elementary from kindergarten and first grade. And then my parents decided to pull me out for a while and homeschool me from second grade through sixth grade. And then I went back to that same Adventist school for grades 7 and 8 for junior high. And around that time, I got very, very involved in Pathfinders, which was my favorite part of my Adventist experience. My dad was a director. It was so much fun. My dad made it a priority for our club to focus on just earning honors and doing all the fun stuff like camping. And so it was just great. That was my favorite part within Adventism, were those couple of years as a teenager in Pathfinders was just great. And then in ninth grade, I got sent to a very, very conservative Seventh-day Adventist boarding academy. And I'm not going to name which one at this time, but it has a reputation for being very, very conservative. And to the point where now, 15 years later, I consider my experience there to be in a cult. Just,
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm not going to delve into that too much. That could be a whole other show.
Whole other show.
But
Yeah.
yeah, just
Yeah.
that was where the bulk of my theological education came from, where I experienced the most spiritual abuse and brainwashing tactics and just indoctrination, all this stuff. It was such an intense experience. I went into the high school as one person and I came out completely different.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. And during that time, I also colportered for 2 summers. I don't know if you guys have that in Australia, but there's a particular program here in the US where kids can go and spend their summer selling Ellen White books door to door. And
Yeah.
I did that for 2 summers, once in California and once in Washington State, which is where I'm from, where I live now.
Yeah.
And that could be a whole other show too
As
of
well.
all the
Yeah.
ways it taught me to lie and manipulate to people in
We
order
have
to
a
get them to
similar
buy
thing
my
here.
books. Yeah, and then I also after that, I did that the summer of my sophomore year and senior year of high school. Excuse me just a moment. Losing my voice a little bit. Then I attended 2 different Adventist universities, and I ended up graduating from there in 2016 with a bachelor's of English with concentration in writing and a minor in education. I'd originally gone into college thinking I was going to be an English teacher, and then it turns out that I really didn't like teaching. And so,
Wow.
but I figured that out so late in my program. I switched and I switched schools and I switched programs. I focused on the English and the writing, and I just finished up the education as a minor because I'd already done so many classes. But yeah, and it was towards the very end of that college experience where my journey out of Adventism started. Up to that point, I had never questioned it. My experience in high school had really, really solidified that with all of the indoctrination that I went through. And then in college, a tragic event happened at my college, not to me specifically, but to a fellow classmate. And that is what kind of snapped me out of the brainwashing and made me realize like how do I say it? Like what my high school in particular had taught me about how the world works and how God works and how he keeps us safe and all these kinds of things. The idea of what reality was that they gave me did not line up with what was actually happening. I couldn't make the two mesh. And so that kind of made a little light bulb go on in my head and say, "Oh no, like I've been lied to here. They taught me something that wasn't true. This is not the way that the world works." And that just kind of sent me spiraling for a while of just kickstarted all of these questions of, well, if they lied to me about this, what else have they lied to me about?
Mm.
And so I've been wrestling through that. That was in 2015 and now we're in 2025. So I've been wrestling with that for the last 10 years. And for the first bit of that, I didn't immediately jump to the conclusion of, oh, they lied to me about one thing, all of Adventism is wrong. Like it wasn't that kind of a situation for me. I started to separate in my mind the Adventism that was at my high school, which was, hyper conservative, very Ellen White focused, all of that, and kind of separate that and try to figure out, okay, well, something's not right here. What is actual Adventism? What is real Adventism? Because they're taking things in an extreme way. They've been lying to me. Something's not right. I'm going to try to like separate the two and figure out what's actually legit and what's not. And I tumbled with that for quite a few years, and in the meantime got married and moved and was still going to church and was really active with the young adult group there and all of that. And then COVID hits and I lose my job and we end up moving to a new part of the state. And anyways, I think a lot of things happened for people during COVID where it kind of gave them the space to do some more questioning and kind of give them a break. And anyways, all of that happened about midway through. About 2022 is where the switch kind of flipped for me. I listened to the last Adventist sermon that I've ever looked up, and it was actually called, I think I've mentioned this before in the comments, it was called Without a Mediator. At the time, I was still following my high school on Facebook, and they advertised this upcoming sermon of saying, hey, there's been all of this misunderstanding and worry and stress about this Ellen White quote from the Great Controversy about, having to stand before God without a mediator. And we're going to address all of those concerns in this sermon. So tune in. It's going to be great. And I was like, perfect. This is going to help me because up to that point, I had almost been kind of gaslighting myself about, am I really remembering my experience at high school correctly? Have things kind of gotten a little conflated in the years since I left? So this is going to be great. This is going to clarify to me whether or not I'm remembering this correctly. And I listened to the sermon, and that was a turning point for me because that was the last sermon I have ever listened to. For the entire thing,
Wow.
the speaker did not use a single Bible verse in the entire sermon, which I think is a record.
Wow.
It blew my mind. The entire thing, he just paraphrased Ellen White. He didn't address any concerns. He just said, yep, Ellen White says this is how it's going to be. We have to work right now to make ourselves perfect so that later we can stand before God without a mediator. And he just reaffirmed all of these problematic things that I was wrestling with. Because to me, looking at really somewhere in my study, I came across the term last generation theology, and I realized that is what I had been taught. That is what my school taught. Their entire like motto and mission and all of that is surrounded based on that concept of helping kids build character to work towards that perfection, basically. And I didn't know that's what I had been taught, but finding that term was really helpful. And for me, it pushes things too far to the point where you're no longer Christianity. Like if you're at the point where you're so perfect that don't need Jesus, you're not a Christian anymore. That's not
Yeah.
Christian. What's the point? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but and anyway, so that sermon
He is there to shepherd us
that for
constantly.
me of and it was like equal parts wonderful and horrible. It was wonderful because it was so validating
Yeah.
to me that I had remembered my experience correctly and I wasn't crazy, and these were the things that they taught me 10 years ago and they were still teaching 10 years later.
Mm.
And anyways, it was just wild, and at the same time it was just so disappointing of
Yeah.
like this was kind of my last shot of explain to me how this works, give me a better reason to believe in this, and they just didn't. And
Yeah.
that was a big turning point where at that point I kind of stopped considering myself an Adventist. I stopped trying to pick apart what's real Adventism and what's not. At that point, I'm like, okay, something is wrong with this whole system because my one high school is not the only church or school that's teaching this. This is part of uh what is the name of that one doctrine? I'm drawing
Investigative
a blank
judgment.
here. The investigative judgment. It's part of it. Like that's the whole point of the investigative judgment. And so I started shifting my focus from a little less on the specifics of my experience and more on the specifics of Adventism in general and Christianity in general, and kind of searching that out. And that was in 2022. Is when I watched that sermon, and then since then, it's just been a lot of studying, a lot of reading, a lot of interacting with programs like this. And then last year in July, my husband and I, we like to go around and visit different museums and stuff, just do little day trips because we're close to Seattle. So we decided this one day back in July, we're going to go visit the National Nordic Museum, which is in northern Seattle. And it's an absolutely fabulous museum. I'm going to come back and touch on that more in my presentation, but it was great. And it's basically just all about the history of immigrants from Nordic countries who came over here, like to America in general, but also specifically to the Pacific Northwest, why they came over, how they came over, all this kind of stuff. And as we were going through the museum, I stopped and watched one of the informational videos that they had that just kind of played on a loop. They've got a bunch kind of scattered throughout the museum, just playing on a loop, talking about different topics. And up to this point, from between 2022, 2024, it's been a couple years. I'm no longer considering myself an Adventist. I'm not going to church anymore. I'm not doing church online anymore. Like I'm just, no. But I hadn't actually officially left. I hadn't taken my name off of the books. I hadn't thought about it. And your show alerted me to the fact that, oh, yeah, that's a thing that you probably should do because your name gets counted in all the stats and all of that. And I'd been toying with the idea, but I couldn't bring myself to take my name off the list. And I couldn't quite pinpoint why. And then sitting there in that museum watching this video, what they presented, it just turned a light bulb off in my head and gave me the mental framework to like mentally disentangle myself from Adventism and be like, okay, now I can leave. Now I can take my name off of the books. And so this past December, I did it. I submitted the request. I took my name off the books, and I am no longer a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that's a very, very brief, rough kind of outline of my experience and where I'm coming from. And in a second, I'm gonna get into that presentation. I'm gonna share what it was that I learned at the museum and how that enabled me to leave. And hopefully maybe someone else can find that useful.
Yeah.
And then also go through the specific practical steps of how to actually
Yeah.
take your name off. But
Wow.
yeah,
That is huge. And thank you for sharing
where I'm
that.
coming from.
That is amazing. And it's a funny feeling, isn't it? To sit there and literally take your name off or publicly say I'm leaving and then take your name off.
Mhm.
I remember when I first told people on Facebook, because I was doing lots of music and I didn't want to have to keep telling people. I thought I'll just tell everyone on Facebook, and that way everyone will know I'm no longer an Adventist. They can decide to invite me or not to sing at the church or whatever.
Mhm.
And I sat there from about 3:30 till maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, just sitting there, hovering above the press send, press post button,
Wow.
and the post said, "This is my last Sabbath as a Seventh-day Adventist," and that was basically
Mm.
it. And I said, "It's not for anyone. I'm not against anyone, or it's not because of any harm done to me or the church. There's no particular church. It's a personal decision." But it felt like, when you're on a really high diving board and you're about to dive, and
Mhm.
there's that
It's
moment where
so
it may
scary.
never happen still. It may not happen. And then you press send and you're falling and it's happened. It's just
Mhm.
an absolutely incredible moment. And then the next day or two, I sent an email to my local church and said, "Hey, I've decided to leave the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's a personal decision. I know you need to take it to the board. Please take my name off at the next session. Don't enter into conversation with me about it. Just take it off, and all the best." And
Mhm.
it took a while, but eventually, yeah, it did. So I'm bringing up on the screen now the slideshow that you've put together for us,
Yes.
and it
Yes,
looks great.
I am not much of a speaker. I am a writer, so most of my thoughts are on these slides. But yeah, so I guess we'll just dive into it then. So I kind of have two different parts to this presentation, and I think we're going to take a little station break in between in the middle.
Yes.
The first part is going to be what I learned at the museum. I'm calling it the immigration process as a metaphor for leaving Adventism. It's all about what gave me the mental framework to be able to actually take the plunge and leave. And then the second half is going to be the nitty gritty. How do you take your name off the books? I'm going to show you screenshots of the email back and forth that I had with my church for getting my name off, just as an example. Obviously, everyone has a different experience with that. I've heard some horror stories in the comments of people who had a really bad experience, but mine was pretty seamless, I'm lucky to say. But anyways, yeah. So I guess we'll just dive in then. Unless any other questions or comments.
Oh, there's a bit of a scratchy sound there. Something
Oh,
on the
I'm
mic.
shifting my notes.
Oh,
Sorry about
that's what it is. That's good. No, dive in.
I had a little
Take
outline of my timeline to make sure I said the right things in the right order. But
Everyone's writing positive comments and
oh, good. I haven't really
spurring
been
you
watching.
on.
Great.
We'll come to
Um,
some of the comments later.
sure. Okay. Well, let's just go ahead and get started then. And maybe just briefly, as just a quick little caveat, if you're in the United States, just the topic of immigration is very politically charged. And
Yeah,
as a quick little
around the
disclaimer,
world.
I just want to say this is in the context of like the stuff that I saw at the museum of we're dealing with like late 1800s, early 1900s, that kind of period of immigration from Europe to the United States. That's what I'm looking at. We're not going to get into all the politicals of was this a good thing? Was this a bad thing? I'm just looking at the process itself. Because obviously there's a lot of problems within the immigration issue, especially with how like Native Americans were treated and land stolen from them and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not focusing on the political stuff, but I just wanted to make that little disclaimer.
Yeah, it's more the
Just
metaphor,
in
isn't it?
case things go a little wild in the comments. I'm just looking at what is at this immigration process as based on what I saw at the museum. But anyways, so we'll just get into that. So my first slide here, these are some pictures from the museum that I went to that I'm talking about, as well as their website there. Again, it's a really fabulous museum. If you're ever in the Seattle area, I highly recommend going. It is so much fun. They have a giant troll, as you can see, out in front of the museum, which I actually only come up to about the knees of that
Oh,
troll.
it's that
And
big.
I'm not super tall, but it's a very, very tall troll. The
Wow.
picture doesn't really do it justice. They've got a couple of Viking ships and some really fun artifacts. Like the clothes that you see up there, they're representative of all of the different Nordic countries. And my favorite part of the museum, if you see down in that bottom left corner, is they have these rooms where the entire thing is just set up like this huge timeline of history and artifacts and events. And anyway, so we went to this museum and we were walking through one of these timeline rooms, and I sat and I watched one of the videos, and it was talking about how difficult it was for people who decided, okay, we need to leave our country for a myriad of reasons. It was talking about the difficulty of deciding what to pack. Like, what do we take with us? What do we leave behind? What is culturally and personally meaningful about life here? And what are the problems that we need to get away from? And for some reason, they weren't talking about religion really much, but for some reason, the way they said it in the video, I can't remember exactly what they said, but it just made this light bulb go off in my head of, oh my goodness, this is why I haven't been able to bring myself to take my name off of the books, because I've just been viewing my Adventist experience as kind of an all or nothing situation. Like, I either needed to be fully Adventist or I needed to be fully something else. And I shouldn't take my name off of the books until I know where I'm going, more or less.
Mm,
And this just gave me this freedom and this framework of, no, there's a whole process. When you're leaving a country to go to another country, you don't just decide to leave and then you're instantly in your new place and all set up and ready to go. There's a whole traveling process. Like, you got to cross the ocean to
yeah.
get there. Or even if you're going to a country next door, like, you got to travel from point A to point B. And there's this whole system in the middle, or experience in the middle, where you're no longer where you used to be, but you're not where you're going just yet either. And anyways, just putting this into this framework gave me the mental tools that I needed to be able to sort through my experience enough to decide, okay, what am I taking out of Adventism? What am I leaving behind? Because before, I was thinking in very black and white terms of, well, either I need to stay in Adventism completely and, accept all of the bad in order to hold on to the good things, or I have to just leave and leave all the good things behind in order to get rid of the bad. And anyways, this just gave me the framework to work past that mentally and be able to leave. And I'm going to delve into that in a bit more detail as we go here. Hopefully, this will be helpful to somebody else who might be struggling for the same reason that I was. But anyway, so there are kind of 3 steps to the immigration process in general. The first step is when you're deciding to leave, and it's kind of a twofold situation where you're dealing with all of the triggering factors that cause you to want to leave. So the decision of why you want to leave, and then the process of actually
Mm,
packing for the trip.
mm,
And then step 2 is when you're on the boat. You have left that country and you're in this, I call it the fluidity of being neither here nor there, that whole
mm,
state of travel. And then step number 3 is like all ashore, you're disembarking, you're off the boat, you've decided where you're gonna land, and now you've got to form a new identity in a new place. Anyways, so yeah, that's kind of the overview of the process. I'm gonna
it's
break
great.
that down a little as it
Mm,
applies to Adventism as we go.
mm,
But yeah. So diving right in. Oh, come on, switch to the next. There we go. So diving right into step 1, starting out with the factors of what drives people to leave their country, and kind of going off of stuff that I saw at the museum. Some of the answers that were listed there were like political upheaval, wars, government policy changes, corruption in leaders, all that kind of stuff is one factor that drives people away. Religious oppression, whether that's persecution, discrimination, etc. Environmental factors such as famine or natural disasters can cause people to want to leave. Better opportunities, economic opportunities elsewhere, such as better access to land or work or education and stuff. Some people leave to reunite with their families if part of their family has already left and they want to join them later. That happened with some of my relatives who were immigrants. Half of them came over and got established, and then the other half came and joined later. My favorite reason, there was a kind of a wooden plaque where a bunch of different quotes from immigrants were engraved into at the museum. And I put my favorite one down here below. I took a picture of it. This one guy, John Erlandson, said, "I'm going to get out of this place. It's too cold." I just thought that was so great. It's so funny.
That
And
is very funny. That is so good.
I have my mom grew up in Southern California and then later moved out here to Washington, and she hates the cold. So, anyways,
Yeah,
I thought it was hilarious.
that is very
But
funny. It's like Adventists saying, "Hey, I've found warmth in Adventism," as they huddle around their little bar heater.
sure.
Hey, come over to the nice lagoon in the Pacific Island that we've got here and
Mhm.
enjoy the weather.
But yeah, and I mean, this is by no means a comprehensive list. It's just kind of a basic overview. It's usually a combination of several of these factors that just added up to the overall conclusion of it would be better to move somewhere else. And just from my point of view, I would argue that most of the time people don't go looking for reasons to leave. Rather, the decision is triggered by something in their circumstances that causes them to consider moving to another country for their own safety or well-being in some way.
That is
And
interesting.
yeah,
But
and
most people don't go looking for reasons to leave.
mhm. And so
Very interesting.
similarly, I wanted to compare that with Adventism of what are the driving factors that cause people to leave Adventism? And again, this is not a comprehensive list, and it's not in any particular order, but some of the reasons are, corruption or similar corruption in leadership systems, religious abuse, could be abuse of other forms as well, cult-like tendencies of conservative communities, doctrinal disagreements, historical inaccuracies, cultural disagreements, personal tragedies, disfellowshipment. Not sure how to say that. People who are disfellowshipped. Some people are kicked out. It's not their choice. It's worth acknowledging that. No longer believing in Ellen White, legalism being prioritized over spirituality, indoctrination and prioritized over critical thought, isolationism from other Christians, fear-mongering based methods of evangelism, lack of transparency in the system. Some people just simply move to a new location that doesn't have an Adventist church there. So they, rather than be by themselves, just join somewhere else because that's all that they have available to them. And similarly, like there's so many other reasons, I'm sure. And it's usually a combination of things, I would guess, rather than just a singular reason. And similarly, like I said in the previous slide, I would argue that most of the time people don't go looking to leave Adventism. I definitely did not. I never intended to be here at all.
Yeah, me either.
Something happens that triggers the desire to leave or causes them to question the church's theology, often both. It's definitely both in my experience. But yeah, so that's kind of.
Can I just ask a question there? Did you, like, when you were sharing that process, you'd gone to that new school, you suddenly thought, hang on a second, this is a bit cult-like. And then, a pathway was opened up that eventually led to you leaving. I had this moment as I was watching the No Vote in 2015 about women's ordination, and I was
Mm.
holding. I've said this
Mhm.
story many times. I was holding my daughter, age 2, I think, at the time, and I just literally thought, "Oh, I can't put my name to this anymore." I'd
Mhm.
already been a good gospel Adventist, liberal, revisionist, progressive Adventist who thought I could bring about change from inside. I already didn't believe in 1844, but was happy to be a cultural Adventist. And I didn't believe keeping the Sabbath was salvific, but I believed, yeah, hey, it's a great day and I enjoy it. And um, so I had no
Mhm.
idea. But that moment was, I can't put my name to it. The next thing I said was to a friend, a bass player in my band. I said, "Hey, by my next birthday, I'm not going to be an Adventist." I don't know why I said it. And then as I came up to the Friday, my birthday was the next on the Monday, I think. I thought, whoa,
Mhm.
whoa. My brain was going, you said this out loud to someone. Are you going to
Ooh.
actually do it? And then I'm finding myself on the phone going, this is my last Sabbath as an Adventist. And boom, I'm gone.
You're a man
And
of your word.
yeah, and I thought, wow, those little moments,
That's
those 3
amazing.
moments of I can't put my name to it,
Mhm.
saying out loud to someone, "I'm gonna leave by my next birthday," and then pressing
Mhm.
send post on that thing. Um, so
Mhm.
I'm wondering, so there's 3 defining moments. You were talking about
Mhm.
this general leaving. Did you,
Uh-huh.
and then you did. But
Mhm.
was there a moment like my women's ordination one where I
Oh,
went, "I can't put
yeah,
my name to it."
definitely.
So
Yeah,
what was
I would
that
call
moment?
yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned the 3 because I call mine my 3 strikes and I'm out. It's really more like 4, but, yeah, just touching on those briefly, the reasons why and like I said, a lot of it was gradual, but kind of the big turning points moments for me. The first one that initially woke me up that I mentioned was well, just to say it specifically, a fellow student of mine was killed in a very bad accident.
Mm,
And I couldn't make sense of it. And the framework that I had been given at and it wasn't somebody that I knew well. But obviously the news was all over the school. And it was somebody my age. And the framework that my high school had given me for why God allows things and doesn't allow things to happen was very much based in the idea, a very extreme version of everything happens for a reason, to the point where they taught us things like Satan's not allowed to do anything bad without God's permission.
whoa,
Anything bad that happens in this world doesn't happen without God's permission. Like just to the extreme. And I had never really questioned that because they paired that along with messages of like, oh, God has this great plan for
plan
your
for
life.
yeah.
He's going to use you in all these amazing ways. You know, if you follow his lead and all of these things, you're going to be safe, you're going to be fine. Nothing bad is going to happen to you until you've fulfilled whatever mission it is that God put you on the earth to do. And I couldn't reconcile that with what happens and other things too about God controlling the weather and whatever. What happened basically was this girl was on her way home from school that day. She was a local student and she was biking home, and on this one trail kind of outside of town, and a truck came around the corner. It was a sunny day. He got blinded by the sun and didn't see her. And then boom, she was just gone. And it was horrifically tragic. I didn't know her personally. I'm sure I saw her around campus. I knew more friends of hers. I actually ended up working for part of her family later after college. But anyways, I couldn't reconcile what had happened to her with the framework I had been given for how the world works from my high school, because I couldn't say, well, they taught me that God controls the weather. Why couldn't God just pull a cloud over the sun in that
That
moment?
moment.
Like,
Mm.
she was my age. She wasn't married. She didn't have kids. She didn't that's a whole other topic. They taught me that that's what my purpose was. But anyways, like that she hadn't done that. She hadn't graduated college. She hadn't gone off and done anything big and important for God. So why did they let this happen? And it was just this, my whole worldview just got shattered. with that happening, because I couldn't reconcile what they had taught me with the reality of the circumstances. And so that was really the first big moment where I went, aha, something's not right here. They lied to me. This is not the way the world works. And which triggered the trying to divide between the high school experience and the actual Adventist doctrine, realizing like, oh, I was in this very, very small bubble for 4 years with little to no, uh, what's the word? Little to no accountability of the leaders and what they were teaching us and stuff. And so I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater prematurely. But anyways, that was the first big one. It kickstarted that digging through Adventism thing. The second one was the sermon that I already talked about. That shifted my viewpoint from, okay, it's not just a problem with my school, or this particular group of people, it's a problem with the system as a whole. So that was a big shift for me. I guess they really have more like 4 strikes rather than 3. But the third one was last spring. A family member sent an article that one of the former staff members from this school had written. He used to be a dean at the school, and now he's a pastor somewhere else. And he had written this article about gratitude, which seemed like a benign enough article. But there was one paragraph in there that just highlighted so clearly for me, just boom, 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 one sentence after another, the structure that I had been taught by Adventism of how to do Bible study and how to interpret scripture. And it was just so clear to me. It was just one sentence after another of the whole process where he quoted a section from the Bible, quoted a Bible verse, went straight to Ellen White to see what she said about it. And in what she said about it, she added a little extra piece in there that you cannot exegete out of the text. And then the third part, he took that little extra piece that she said and turned that into a works-based formula to then apply to your life. And that was just such an overt, like, this is not how you do theology. This is not Bible-based system. This is this is just it was such a mess. And just
That's amazing.
that it just so clearly summarized it for me of this is the problem with that system of, and I'm not saying every Adventist on the planet does their theology that way.
No.
But I think systemically that is often the pattern of quote the Bible, go to Ellen White to interpret it, take what she interprets, and then turn it into a formula.
Yeah.
In this particular article, it was the story of I don't want to get into too much of a rabbit trail, but it was the story of the 10 lepers where, Jesus heals them and the one Samaritan turns around and says, thank you. Ellen White adds in there that the reason Jesus healed them is because he knew this one guy was going to say thank you, which you can't really get that out of the text. That's not actually what Jesus is saying there.
No.
But then this pastor took that and turned it into a formula and said, oh, look at this. If one person is thankful, that means God is going to bless 9 other people on our behalf. Think of the exponential possibilities for our schools and churches and like all this whole thing. And it was just wild. But that was very much my experience at that school of that's how they taught me how to read the Bible and how to do theology. And that was a wake up turning point for me too, of this is not Bible-based way to do. This is not exegesis. This is eisegesis. So that was the third one. And the very last one was a different article breaking down how Hanukkah is the perfect fulfillment of the 2300 day prophecies. and not 1844. And just the math of all of that, how that works. And prophecy was never a really big reason why I was an Adventist or why I'm not an Adventist, but it was that final little push, like, you know, the little butterfly that lands on Eeyore's house and then it
Yes.
collapses. Like, it was just that final little push that I needed to be like, well, there's no 1844, there's no Ellen White, there's no investigative judgment, there's no reason to be an
Yeah.
Adventist. I am out. Like, just
Yeah.
briefly, those.
That's a good,
Yeah.
another good little metaphor.
Mhm.
Hey, I just want to quickly throw something
Yeah,
in
sure.
here. Outside, there is a massive thunderstorm just hit,
Oh,
and there's lightning.
okay.
If I disappear, everyone, Rachelle, you keep
Okay.
going because it may boot me off. But what I've learned in the past is because you're going live from over there in the faraway lands, you will still be live.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm just letting you know that's why. Massive thunder and lightning outside right now. But
Mhm.
we have these beautiful summer storms over here. Massive.
Nice.
I was
It is
sitting.
January. It is cold
Yes.
here.
Oh, yeah, the
We have a
opposite.
dusting of snow.
I was literally sitting in our swim spa. It's like a spa, but 5.5 meters long with my two daughters. We're just sitting in there
That
yesterday
sounds so
evening. It
nice.
was so beautiful, sun setting, lovely sky, and this massive storm rolled in and there was lightning. So we quickly beelined out of it, but it was just beautiful. Anyway, that's just a mild interruption
Noted.
to say if I disappear,
Okay.
Rachelle will keep on going.
Okay. Sounds good. I just wanted to Vega Cool one in the comments says it's called narcigesis. And yes, I think a couple shows ago, one of your other guests used that term, and I connected it to that part of my story. It was really great. But anyways, yeah, so diving back into here, those were my reasons. Some of the big ones. There's a lots of other stuff along the way, like studying Ellen White, losing complete faith in her, and all that kind of stuff along the way. But anyways, back to the program. Later on in part 2, if people are interested, if not, we can skip it. Maybe you guys can tell me in the comments. But while I was researching for this slide, I just did a quick Google search of reasons why people leave the Adventist church, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything glaringly obvious, just because I've been staring at my screen for too long. And a study popped up that the Adventist church did about this survey study about why people leave the church and why they come back, that they did about 10 years ago. And it's really interesting. I made kind of a little side rabbit trail, some slides about that I've put in section 2.
Good.
So if people are interested in hearing from the Adventist like documentation from this study, what they believe, what the church believes the reasons are about why people leave, the list is quite different from the list that I put up here. There's a little overlap, but what I found was quite shocking. So if people are interested, we can do that in the second half,
Definitely.
and if not, we can skip it.
No,
So
we
maybe
will go there for sure.
people can let us know in the comments what they think. But anyways, moving on. So all the reasons to leave. Moving on to the next part. Once you've decided to leave, well, now you got to pack. What are you going to bring with you? What do you have to leave behind? So just pulling up the next slide there. And I wanted to point out that there's kind of two different reactions to or circumstances for this deciding to leave. Some people, especially with the immigration stuff, some people were forced to leave immediately due to extreme circumstances. They didn't have any time to pack. They had to leave everything behind and just get out now. You know, for example, like their city was under attack or they're fleeing a natural disaster. Persecution was put into law, like a little bit of a more recent example, like Jews having to flee the Nazis during World War II. Forced deportation is another one of people being, forcibly kicked out, criminals being deported as indentured servants to work in the US. I found a couple people in my family tree that happened to way back when. So that was also a reason they didn't get to choose what to take with them or not. But anyways, there can be extreme circumstances where people don't have time to pack. But for most, the circumstances are not that extreme. And so they actually have time to figure out, what are we going to take? What are we going to leave behind? And I found that a really helpful way of thinking about it is dividing it into tangible and intangible terms. So, like, what has to be left behind that you can't take with you? Like, tangibly, if you're leaving a country, well, you're leaving the land, you're leaving your property, your house. People who choose not to go with you and they choose to remain behind, maybe a harmful system of government that you're fleeing, you're leaving that country, you're going to be under a new government now, like some of those tangible things. And then some of the intangible things that you might want to leave behind are, various philosophies or ideologies, religious doctrines, ways of thinking, cultural stuff that didn't have any meaning to you, whatever. Things that are harmful or just negative that you decide, like, no, I don't want to take that with me. And similarly, you can apply that of, what do you want to take with you? What are the tangible things? Recipes, cultural items, rituals, stories, all this kind of stuff. Like, what do I want to bring with me that's tangible and intangible, that are positive and meaningful, and you want to preserve for the next place where you're going? And get the next slide going here. I just wanted to highlight, did it go back? Go back one. Whoops. I wanted to highlight that process of figuring out, what are you leaving behind, what are you taking, what's tangible, what's intangible. It allows you to separate what you value from your experience from the objective reality of your experience. So, like, my ancestors, for example, they were able to say, like, oh no, I love my Swedish heritage. I love my country. I love my family. I love our culture, all these things. But for, XYZ reasons, I can't physically stay here anymore. This isn't sustainable for me. And be able to separate your identity from your circumstances, if that makes sense. And so as that relates to Adventism and kind of mentally distangling, similarly, some people feel that they're just forced to leave immediately, because they've had such an extremely harmful or traumatic experience within Adventism that some people just choose to walk away and just leave it all behind. No further analysis. They just decide it's not worth it, or it's too painful, or for whatever reason. Some people just do that and they just walk away, and I feel like that's completely valid. But for a lot of the rest of us, and I think especially those of us who still find value in a religious expression and Christianity in general, we're kind of forced into this analysis and disentangling process. And I think for most leaving Adventism, the process of doing this with your beliefs and your experience is vital for healing and developing a healthy spiritual life going forward. And when you're kind of thinking about that and going through those things, similarly, I find it's helpful to put it in tangible and intangible categories. And a really helpful question for me was to look at whatever it is I'm looking at and ask, is X dependent on Adventism? Like, do I have to remain in Adventism in order to hold on to this thing? Or can I take this thing with me and apply it somewhere else? So, like, for example, specific doctrines within Adventism, like, say, Ellen White, it makes absolutely no sense to say that I believe Ellen White is a prophet, but I'm not going to be an Adventist. I'm not going to be a part of her church. That makes no sense. I would argue that if you're going to believe in Ellen White, you have to be an Adventist. You can't really separate those two, and some of the other doctrines as well, versus For example, something that you could take with you from Adventism, haystacks. You don't have to be an Adventist to eat a haystack. Like that is not dependent on my
Wrote,
Adventism. Yep, see, it
I took haystacks
yeah,
with
it's the great
Vega,
uniter
and
among
at the
us
first
all.
thing that came to my mind when you said that, as
Mhm.
you talk,
It's yeah,
I was like,
something
yeah,
tangible. You don't have to be a member of the church to eat it. You can it's a great way to use your leftover
yeah,
vegetables, like yeah, but anyways, it just a little bit of humor there, but yeah, and I just wanted to touch on because you've talked about this a little bit in your experience of I wanted to touch on why is this important because you get so much pushback and I've seen others get a lot of pushback as well online about like why can't you just leave Adventism alone? Why are you so obsessed with this? I've seen people asking you in the comments
yes,
specifically
literally that
and
word.
it
Yeah,
feels like that the spirit behind that is like they're kind of forcing you into that first category of people of just saying, well, if you're gonna leave, just leave it all. Don't bother, don't touch it, don't
yeah,
pack, like just up and go. And maybe they don't realize that, but I just wanted to touch on the reasons for maybe people who don't understand why this is so important. Just kind of explain some of that of why I think disentangling and going through this process is really important.
mm,
It's for developing a sense of spiritual self awareness as you're going forward. And even if you decide not to leave Adventism, I think it's a healthy exercise to really go through and sort what you believe and why you believe it. So that you have that spiritual self-awareness so that you can make informed theological decisions going forward. And if you are leaving, so
mm,
you're prevented from being exploited by any other type of abusive system so you don't just trade one problematic group for another. But yeah, just
yeah,
digging into that a little, like I've put up there on the slides, it helps you understand like it's important to know not only what you believe, but also why and how you believe it. Like what are the thought processes that you use to make your theological conclusions? And where do they come from? Are they based on certain assumptions? Are those assumptions factual? Who came up with them? Who benefits if you continue to believe in them? Are you outsourcing your mind to somebody else without realizing it? Like, are you using critical thinking when you're
mm,
taking in spiritual messages, or are you just blindly accepting everything out of an Adventist pulpit or whatever
mm,
church you come from? Like, are you just blindly accepting everything that comes out of the pulpit as truth without actually looking into it?
mm,
Um, so just kind of understanding how your mind works when it comes to thinking about spiritual things will really help you when you're looking for where else you want to go. And like I touched on, it
mm,
keeps you from just trading one problematic system for another simply because it feels familiar. It can be really beneficial to pick apart what exactly in my experience was healthy and what wasn't, so that you can identify the signs and problems going forward looking at other churches so you don't end up just getting hurt again. Um, and also just kind of applying to the more historical looking at other denominations sort of aspects, this really looking at your doctrines specifically and where they come from and how they got there, how they developed and who developed them and why, under what circumstances. It can help make you understand your position as an Adventist or as a former Adventist in kind of the larger theological context of just historical Christianity. And it can make you more aware of how much history and culture can influence spirituality and religion. Adventism really likes to present this idea that, hey, we just believe the Bible objectively, everything is great. We just came to these conclusions straight from there. And no, that is not the case. They were influenced by movements that came before them, by thoughts that came before them. Just a really quick little book plug of a book that I found really helpful is The Oxford History of Christianity. I'm slowly working my way through that, but that is helping me so much understand this broader perspective of where do our assumptions about theology come from, and when did they happen, and why, and what were the circumstances. Anyways, it's really helpful to understand that, not only so you can understand yourself, but also so that you can understand others. You can more clearly, you can empathize with people even if you don't agree. You can understand where and why you disagree on certain doctrines, and also like in clarifying communication within each other, like those Christianese terms that everybody uses, but churches have slightly different definitions, especially Adventism uses a lot of terms that mean something completely different in other church contexts.
True.
And anyways, just the clarity that comes from that is so helpful. And just a couple other quick points of why this is important. It can help you dismantle the assumption that your salvation is contingent on denominational affiliation or membership, which is such a big one in the Adventist church, especially if, like me, you come from a very hyper conservative experience or background. Uh, I was always taught that we are Adventist first and we are Christian second if we have to be.
Mm.
And that we are saved not because we're Christians, but because we're Adventists. And all the other Christians who are not Adventist are either lazy or stupid or willfully wanting to sin and not follow God. And just all of those really horrible assumptions that they use to prop up Adventism as we're the special ones, we're the elite ones.
Yeah.
We're saved because we're Adventist, because we know all the answers, and not because anything to do with Jesus. But anyway, so this really helps unpack that and offers a little freedom from that line of thinking.
Mm.
Just overall, it enables you to seek out healthy spiritual relationships and community going forward.
Mm.
Um, and just kind of wrapping up that point, the process, kind of similar to what I said before, it's about disentangling the meaningful parts of your spiritual life
Yes.
out of an abusive system.
Well, I love how you've said that in one sentence.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, as you know, when you were relating it to observing people saying to me, "Why don't you just walk away? If you leave,
Mhm,
you're not happy, just walk away. Why are you obsessed?" That one sentence truly explains why.
mhm,
Because you're having to admit something they don't want to admit, that it
mhm,
is an abusive system. Sure, there's
mhm,
Adventists who have not been abused and it's not their experience,
mhm,
and good on you. But collectively speaking, statistically
mhm,
speaking, a high percentage of people do express the feeling that, boy, hang on, I've been spiritually abused here. There's something
mhm,
systemic here that shuts my voice down, that
mhm,
shuts me down in some way, that disallows me to kind of think outside of the box. That in itself, the very
mhm,
fact that a pastor wrote to me this morning saying he wishes he could be on the show but can't because he's going to lose his job if he does, that's abusive. Like a church system should be fostering the idea of diverse thought, and should
mhm,
encourage different views and aspects. If someone wants to
mhm,
say, look, I think the seal of God may not be the Sabbath, it might be the Holy Spirit, they should be allowed to
mhm.
talk about that stuff, but
Yeah,
they can't. Yeah.
it's the, which I feel like gets into, I don't know if it's a quote exactly or a concept of the idea that the truth will always hold up against scrutiny,
Yes.
but a lie will always want to hide.
Yes.
And I think it's very telling that the system does not foster an okay atmosphere for asking questions and challenging things and really looking.
Yeah. And
But
that's why,
yeah,
as you say in that one sentence, which is just gold,
oh, thank
a few
you.
people have screenshot it. Andy Mack says, "I've screenshot that one."
Yeah,
Uh,
feel free to screenshot anything from this presentation, like, just
and
yeah.
you know, it takes the process is you have to disentangle yourself. A lot of
Mhm,
me doing the show is me going, "Whoa, hang on, what happened? What just happened for those
mhm,
50 years?" Um,
mhm,
and, you know, I do laugh a lot of that kind of criticism off that I'm being obsessive or whatever. That kind of spurs me on to
mhm,
do it even more. But
mhm,
there's a serious element to it as well. If I that
mhm,
the people who are happily saying, "Hey," this other person wrote to me this morning and said, "Oh, look, I'm staying, and I'd love to come on your show and talk about the close of probation, but I can't because I think it will unsettle people, and I'll work with the saints from the inside." And he was trying to be a bit flippant about it. And okay, I'm not
mhm,
mocking that, but the very fact that you can't boldly share the insights you believe you have, the gems of Adventism, and have to work in some kind of silent, mysterious, behind the scenes way, you're being abused.
mhm.
They don't even know they are being abused.
Or at the very least, I would say it's very cult-like.
Mm.
But in just as a little caveat, you kind of touched on this. I think there are some local congregations that can function as more or less just a benign, run of the mill,
Yeah.
any other kind of church, but it's more the actual official system of
Yes.
Adventism, of the fundamental beliefs that I'm pointing to and criticizing and saying,
Yeah.
hey, there's a problem here, and this is why I'm leaving.
But
Um,
even the warm,
like you said,
fuzzy,
some
even the
people
little
say they
warm,
didn't have that experience, but
yeah.
anyway.
But even the warm, fuzzy, nice local SDA church that has,
Mhm,
Sabbath lunch and does great things in the community, even those leaders within that church are constantly curating what they say in public because they know the
mhm,
local conference is going to come down on them if they are a little bit too outside the box theologically. And so they tend to
mhm,
be just warm and fluffy and happy, which is great, but you'll go to one of
mhm,
their sermons and you won't. They don't want to rock the boat with too much Ellen White stuff, so you won't hear that. And so it's all light and fluffy, and it's kind of good in a way, but in many ways they're benign because they've had all the teeth taken out of them, and so in another way they're being abused, even though because
mhm,
there's only so far they can go, and a lot of those
mhm.
ministers,
Or at
um,
the very least, coerced and controlled.
yeah, they're still being coerced and controlled. Yeah, see,
Mhm.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, I have a second sentence that builds off of this one.
Mm, good.
After with the distangling stuff, your meaningful parts out of the abusive system, I also wanted to highlight that kind of just like in an abusive system wants to believe that you can't have a good life without them.
Yes.
Kind of, and you see that attitude a lot um in the system as well, of kind of like what you were touching on with like the control and
Mm,
that kind of things. And there's also so many messages of like, oh well, if you're unhappy, there's really not a better place to go because we're the ones that have the truth, and you can't have Jesus without us, you can't be saved without us. And
yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
I felt like that concept
That's
connected
that's
also
yeah.
really well
Yeah.
here.
And if you're out there saying, "Hey, actually, I am having a good life outside of that relationship," they
Mhm,
tend to think, "Oh, you're just, who do you think you are? You're just putting us down
mhm.
now." So that's why they want to cut you off even more so.
Mhm. Or even if you're questioning, if you're going through that packing process and you're getting pushback on that, it's because of this messaging, this all or nothing, black and white kind of idea of
Yeah.
you're saved by being an Adventist, not
Mm.
because of Jesus. But anyways,
Yeah. No, that's really good. Really good.
That's kind of my summary of the first step.
Yes.
And then I
It's
was gonna launch into here, being on the boat. If that's okay with you, or unless
yes.
there's anything else to
No,
comment
good.
on
People are
the first
just saying on the nose, as in you nailed it.
Great.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
just for fun, I threw these pictures up on the screen. I did some digging around in Ancestry a couple years ago. This is the actual boat that my Italian ancestors on my father's side came across to America
wow.
on. This is the actual boat. I was able to track it down, and there were some
Wow.
photos and a painting. And so just because of the topic, I threw it up there for fun because I had them.
That's
Thought it'd
so
be fun.
good.
It looks
Yes.
like it just looks like a little matchstick to me of like what a
I
terrible
know.
ride. Like,
And I wonder
and
how long the journey was.
I'm not sure. I haven't looked into the
Yeah.
specifics. But
It's a big
anyways,
step.
it is.
And
So
there's this
launch.
whole period that you're on the boat. You've
Yep.
you haven't landed, you've left. Who am
Yep.
I? Where am I going?
I exactly. I call it the fluidity of being neither here nor there.
Yeah,
And I just that is full disclosure, that's where I am right now. I have left Adventism. I've taken my name off the list. I am not sure where I'm gonna land yet. I'm still on the middle of this boat ride. And anyways, I just wanted to highlight some aspects of what that's
yeah.
like.
And can I just say I love that you've said that because,
Mhm.
you can share where you are at in a journey. You don't have
Mhm.
to reach a conclusion and then have the
Mhm.
answers to reflect upon. People wanna
That's
know where you're at right now,
Which
you know.
is what one of the things that prevented me from taking my name off the list is because I felt like I had to, because Adventism is such a system of always having to have the answers. I felt like, oh, I have to have the answer of where I'm going to go next and why, and have all of the theology perfectly worked out before I can take my name off of the list. And I realized, no, that's not the case. There's this being on the boat part of the journey that
Mm,
it's okay to take my name off and go ahead and leave and get on the boat.
yes,
Um,
yes,
yeah, but anyways, getting into some aspects of that, I just wanted to highlight like 6 different things. The first one is your journey is just beginning. Deciding to leave is not enough. You have to actually ride the boat. And kind of in that second column there, I'm comparing that to leaving Adventism. Choosing to leave the SDA church is not the end of the process. It's definitely a huge step
yeah,
and a huge accomplishment. But it's is not the end. It is just the beginning. And now, instead of only looking inwards at Adventism, now you also start to look outwards at the
yeah,
rest of Christianity and all of the options of directions where you could go. Like you're looking away from the shore now. Sometimes
yeah.
you look back, but you've got the whole ocean to look at now.
Yeah. Can I just raise just a quick thing that a couple of people have
Yeah,
said there that pertain
yeah,
to
of
this
course.
exact thing?
Mhm,
Um, Vegas Cool says, after talking to other Christians who migrate to different traditions, they don't have the deer in the headlights experience when they leave. That's very
mhm,
true. And that's why we're having this conversation, because with Adventism, if you
mhm,
leave, it's like that ship in the storm that you just showed there. It's
mhm.
not just a simple little, I was in this
It's
town, I went to the Baptist, I'm now in this town, I'm going to the local Episcopalian.
Nope, it
It's
is
no big
us
deal.
versus them.
Adventist, and because it's a big deal is why we have to talk about it.
Mhm,
And I thought there was another good one here, um, that No Sunday Law said, and you don't need to join another denomination. Like,
mhm,
part when
yeah,
you land, when we get to the third part of this kind of process that you've been sharing,
mhm,
you don't have to go, "Oh, okay, I'm now gonna become something else." You might just
mhm,
enjoy fellowship with a bunch of different local
yeah,
churches, or create your own
mhm,
little small group. There's many ways to land,
mhm.
which I know that you will come to
That
as
that's
well.
coming up on
That's
the next
coming up.
slide. Yep,
And,
exactly,
uh
yeah.
I think John Kaler said a bit earlier that on a steamship, it would have taken about 6 weeks. Uh, and Barry says Barry's from Australia, and he says one of my ancestors in the 1800s on his way to Sydney, Australia, got drunk and missed getting off in Sydney, and he disembarked in Wollongong, which is like a couple of hours south, a whole other town.
Oh, that's a funny story.
Yeah, so his whole life was different when he landed.
That's hilarious. Oh, anyways, yeah, definitely all those comments are great, and I'm touching on a couple of those in the next few points here.
And can I just say,
Yeah.
just while we've got a little confirmation in the comments. So Andy Mack, who has been on this journey in many ways on the ship, is going to, and I think inspired by today, is going to come on the show this time next week.
Oh,
and
great.
actually take her name off the books in the show.
Wow.
So you've inspired
Cool.
an actual manifestation of actioning, not just an idea. So
that is
join
amazing.
us.
Well, I'm not going to take credit for that. That is amazing. Good for you.
So
that'll be interesting to watch and see how that. I hope it goes well for you.
Yes.
But yeah,
I hope you can join us in the next week, and
definitely, I'll definitely tune in for that.
Give us some encouragement from the sidelines.
Sure.
Now, just while I think you have kind of answered this, but Dale is just asking, just curious, what was the main reason you left the Adventist faith? Can you?
Yeah, if summed up in one word, doctrinal reasons. If you later when we're done, if you want to rewind this stream and listen to it over, I go into a little more detail. I'm not spreading my whole story around today. I'm just kind of focusing on this one aspect of my journey because I think it's helpful to others who might be in the same boat literally that I'm in.
But, well, Andy Mack just wrote, "Take credit, Rachelle."
Well, thank you. That is very kind. But you're the one making your decision as your journey. But I'm definitely here. We're here to support you. So that's great. Anyways, yeah. Okay. Well, getting back into more of the on the boat stuff then of what you have to look forward to, Andy and others, when you take your name off. Your journey will not be perfectly linear. This is a 1800s boat ride, not a nonstop direct flight. Even if you've got a map and a plan, you probably won't end up sticking to it. And lots of unforeseen storms, waves, obstacles, all those kinds of things can temporarily knock you off course or where you think your course should be and send you in a bunch of different directions. Which has definitely been true for me. Questions and discoveries are going to pop up that lead you places you never thought you'd go. The things that you agree with that you previously disagreed with are going to really, really surprise you. I have completely shocked myself with some of the denominational changes that I've made where I've realized, oh, Adventism taught me something about this concept and taught me that everyone else was wrong. But really, I feel that the other people have more facts and evidence on their side. So I'm going to believe that now and switch and things like that. And it's so easy to get lost in all of the theological rabbit trails. Every question that you try to answer is going to spawn at least 10 other questions that you're going to want to chase down. And those are going to spawn another 10. And it's crazy. And speaking to that, into the next point, the ride will be wilder than you think. Getting your sea legs may take a while. And adapting to this fluid motion of the water after you've been living on solid land for so long can take a while. It can be very difficult. It is normal to feel nauseous. Anyone who's ever been sailing before on the ocean, I've done it once, and it was a feeling unlike anything else. And storms may pop up that may attempt to knock you off the boat. And I just really wanted to highlight this because I think this is such a big one of learning to live in this discomfort of asking questions and living with uncertainty can be so difficult after living in Adventism because it's a system that requires you to have all the answers at all times. And so completely flip-flopping that is really hard to make that mental change. Like I still find myself applying that all or nothing. I have to have the answer for absolutely everything to my experience, and it's just such a hard mindset to get out of, and it really gives you you experience this sense of loss of security that's really intense sometimes because now you have to actually have faith that God is going to save you. You have to have faith that Jesus is the one that saves you, and you aren't saved by being an Adventist and having all of the Adventist answers. Now you actually have to trust God instead of trusting yourself and your own knowledge. And that's a very wild experience when you've come from such that intense mindset. And
Mm.
I think it can be overwhelming for people. And I just kind of added, it's your choice whether to jump ship or to batten down the hatches and hold on for the ride. And I think this is where a lot of people get hung up and they do decide to jump ship and they can't break out of this I have to have all of the answers mindset. And then you look at Christianity and you realize you're playing a game of telephone that spans centuries. And there's so many ideas and so many questions and so many answers from so many directions. And if it's all on you, your responsibility to find the exact right path, a lot of people just throw up their hands and say, I can't do that. I'm just one person. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert. I can't handle all of this. And they just throw
Mm.
up their hands and leave.
Mm.
And I think that's valid. I think it's sad, but it's also valid. But I think it stems from specifically that Adventist mindset of I have to have all the answers. There's just one singular way to be saved, to believe everything about God. There's only one correct way to believe about every single doctrine ever.
Mm.
And that I think is a really, really hard thing to adjust to.
Mm.
Pulling up the just three other things. You might toss some things overboard. So the reevaluation process of your luggage continues even when you're on the boat. And unnecessary items may be tossed overboard to lighten the load. And some of what you packed might not be sustainable for the journey. Just because like you've gone through that packing process and mentally detangling different things out of Adventism, that doesn't mean that you're done with that process. Like I feel like you can be done to a certain extent where you're able to take that step and say, yeah, I'm going to get on the boat. But that process doesn't stop when you get on the boat. There's still stuff that's going to pop up. You're going to discover things that you thought you needed, and then you realize they're weighing you down. And
Mm.
then you've got to let them go. Or some of the doctrines that you thought, oh no, like I'm going to reject these, but this one is sound. This one I'm going to take with me later, that might crumble under further theological scrutiny. So the packing process does not have to be absolutely complete.
No.
When you step onto the boat, it kind of just that still keeps going as you're on that ride. And you might stop at some ports of call where you temporarily get off the boat somewhere and explore for a little while, but then ultimately decide to get back on the boat and keep sailing. And it's okay to take a break from the waves, and it's okay to decide to set sail again.
Mm.
You might decide to explore a particular denomination for a while, and then upon closer examination or experience wise, you might just decide, this isn't quite for me.
Mm.
And I just want to validate that it's okay to change your mind. it's okay to learn and explore. I think there's kind of this stigma where people get shamed for church hopping,
Yeah.
and they don't realize what a fantastic learning experience that is. Like even if you are Adventist and you're not looking to leave, like going to other churches and experiencing other people's traditions and learning more about their theology and history and where it comes from, it can help you understand others better and
Mm.
also understand yourself better with what you believe and why you believe it. But anyways, yeah, I think especially with Adventism, there's such a stigma around church hopping, and like they call it like almost like a form of cherry picking your way through Christianity to find exactly what you
Mm.
want. And that's really not what's happening
Not
here.
at
It's
all.
seeking for truth.
Mm.
But anyways, I feel like it's important to say that stopping here and there and changing your mind is perfectly valid.
Yeah.
And then kind of to wrap up the being on the boat thing, you kind of touched on this, and some of the other comments did. Different boats sail at different speeds. Everyone starts their journey from at a different time, from different ports, on different boats, even if
Mm.
they're all coming from the same country. And the size of the ship affects its speed. And some journeys are short, some journeys are long. You know, everybody's journey out of Adventism is unique, and there's not one particular right way to do it. And I would argue that whatever your experience is within Adventism is gonna affect how easy or difficult it is for you to leave, and how much time you are gonna need to spend on that boat.
Mm.
Um, and it might be fast for some and take a lifetime for others.
Yeah.
One of the commenters said, like, you don't have to get off and join somewhere else. You can just stay on the boat. And previously, when we were talking about initially, when you and I talked just privately about doing this show, you had mentioned you're not sure that you ever want to get off the boat.
Yeah. Or
And
I've gotten off the boat, but I've found a nice little island that's got a lagoon, and I'm just hanging out with other island hoppers.
oh,
And
there
we,
you
you know, so
go.
that
Yeah.
so I'm
But yeah,
yeah,
so it's completely valid that some people will not land somewhere specific, and that's fine
yeah,
too, and others
yeah,
will in
yeah,
at different times and at different speeds. Um,
exactly. And I like the idea that you were saying earlier about there's no need to besmirch someone because they're just trying out different churches. That's not flip-flopping. It
mm-mm,
takes a while to find. It's like me finding my favorite cafe, there's like 10 that
mhm,
I go to, every week, the 2 or 3
mhm,
different ones, and I work
mhm.
around and, I
And you can
eventually
appreciate
settle on 2 or 3 that are my favorite.
yeah, you can appreciate that, hey, this coffee shop over here makes a great latte, and this one over here
Yeah.
does a great, iced tea, and this one over here does
Exactly.
boba or whatever. Like
E
different
e
places have different things to offer.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
can learn from that, and that can be an enriching experience. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be this kinda all or nothing hunt for the like, cherry picking hunt for the truth kind of a thing. It can be
exactly. Yeah,
really it can just enrich your spiritual experience, even if you decide, "Hey, this particular church is not for me, but I really appreciate this aspect about it, and that's
yeah,
gonna influence my spirituality going forward."
yeah. And
Um
I definitely won't ever sign up to any other church, but, having said
Mhm,
that, I enjoy fellowshipping with
mhm,
different people in different groups. That's just me. It's
mhm,
about ultimately, it's a journey of self-discovery, which will continue for the rest of your life. We never
mhm.
end this process of learning about
Yeah,
things.
and
But
even
if
yeah.
you're leaving an abusive relationship, which those who are on the boat have decided they're doing, and, there's other versions of why, et cetera, that you've covered, but
Mhm,
ultimately, there will eventually be a defining moment when you leave. Well, if you're on the boat, you've made that decision, and then ultimately, once that
mhm,
journey's completed, you will land somewhere, but the learning will just be a beautiful experience of a lifetime after that.
mhm. And hopefully a little of that learning will continue even when you do get off the boat, even if you do join a particular denomination later.
Yeah.
hopefully that mindset of being open to learn and open to study and having the freedom to say, hey, I was wrong.
Yes.
That's something that I get to do now as a non-Adventist. As an Adventist, I'm not allowed to say that anything Adventist is wrong. Now I have the freedom to do that. Um,
Yes.
anyways, yeah. So just touching on that last step, all ashore, just forming a new identity in a new world. It's a little awkward for me to talk about it because I'm not to that point yet. But yeah, when you finally decide to disembark, because you've decided where you're going to settle, and or I consider that choosing an expression of Christianity or joining a particular denomination and saying, okay, I'm going to align myself with this church now. Hopefully it's because you've done enough research into the other denominations out there, and you're pretty settled and you feel like you don't need to do much more, and you feel confident in your understanding of Christianity just as a concept, as a whole, and you agree with whatever this denomination's traditions and doctrines and approach to theology. You agree with it. It has a healthy approach to leadership, organization, policies, member relations. Hopefully it's got a really good healthy structure, and that Jesus is at the center of their theology. It's not a works-based, and that whatever this particular community or local church is hopefully facilitates that connection with God for you and helps you grow in faith. And I imagine even when you do decide, there's going to be a bit of a period of adjustment and kind of settling in and kind of melding the parts of your past identity and your past experience with your new life. And hopefully learning to celebrate your whole story, while accepting the past and living in the present and embracing your future.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of, and also actually with that, I wanted to make one little side comment here. It might feel a little off topic, but just bear with me for 1 second and it'll make sense. So when it comes to deciding to leave, but also just that adjustment period of coming to a new life, there's some aspects of my own mental health journey that I found also kind of give an interesting view of this. And I kind of have a theory, based in my experience and understanding with PTSD and CPTSD, of why this transition out of Adventism is more difficult for some than it is for others. And just briefly, for people who don't know, PTSD is post traumatic stress disorder. And CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. They are related, but they're slightly different. I have both of them. I live with both of them. I'm not going to get into all the reasons why. But just for people who don't know what that is, basically, both of these conditions are a neurological response to trauma. And what they do is they hijack your brain and rewire your neural pathways in an attempt to keep you safe from future danger. So something traumatic happens, and your brain jumps on that and says, okay, what happened here? Let's program so that we know all of these particular stimuli mean dangerous. We're going to program that into your system so that when this comes up again, we can keep you safe. And then it triggers this physiological response, of like flashbacks, adrenaline, cortisol levels get released, those chemicals get released into your body. You can have panic attacks. Basically, your body will take something from that traumatic experience. Just from my personal example, part of my PTSD comes from being in a really bad car accident back in 2020, right before COVID shut down. So I feel like I was in quarantine a month before everybody else was. But anyways, part of my experience with that, not to get too much into the weeds, but my brain decided that some aspects of that crash of the feeling of impact in the car, the sound of shattering glass when my window broke, those kind of things. My brain hijacked that and said, okay, when we hear that, that means we're in a car accident. And so we need to react accordingly. We're going to flood my body with adrenaline. We're going to have a panic attack, all this kind of stuff.
Mm.
Anyway, so basically your body reacts as if you were in danger, even if you're not. Like, I started experiencing this shortly after that accident. If we would go over a speed bump that was too high and it would hit the bottom of the car, that would set it off. Or I'm walking along the sidewalk, somebody drops their drink, it's a glass bottle, it breaks, that would set it off. And it's such a disorienting experience because your body is reacting this way and your brain is reacting this way, but there's still a slight part of your brain, it's almost an out of body experience where you're able to identify, I'm not actually in a car accident right now. But just thinking that and realizing that doesn't make the physiological response go away. Anyways, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but basically,
Yeah.
healing from this whole condition involves working with the neuroplasticity of your brain
Yeah.
to try to rewire those pathways so that your brain is no longer sending those danger signals and
Yeah.
causing your body to go through all this physical distress when you're not actually in
Mm.
danger.
And Angela Lima, who's been on the show and is, I think, a doctor of psychology or psychiatry,
Oh, good. She can
has
fact check
said,
me on
yes,
this, that I'm doing it
yes,
right.
it is, and the psychological damage is deep.
It is, and it's heartbreaking because all the amount of wanting it to go away doesn't make it so. You can't
No.
think your way out of it. You have to do specific things to work with your brain.
And
And
if it didn't happen to you, if you're watching and you say, "That's not my experience," don't
Mhm.
judge me. We're not judging you. We're going, "Wow,
No.
awesome. That wasn't your experience. That's
Mhm.
fantastic." But if
Oh,
you
for sure.
study Adventism and people who leave Adventism, and I read a study the other day or a while back, the other day could be last year in my brain, but it said over 40 million people have left the Adventist church since the 60s, and there are
Mhm.
currently 25 million-ish officially.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a big number of people, and a high percentage of people who have left the church talk about this trauma. So it's
Mhm.
not just because you haven't experienced it, dear listener, dear
Mhm.
viewer, it doesn't you cannot you cannot invalidate those of us who did
Mhm.
experience a trauma.
Mhm.
And also
And
those who can't
yeah.
speak because they are concerned of how it will position them, they're
Mhm.
even unaware that they're going through a kind of trauma
Mhm.
at the very moment.
And that's well, touching a little bit on what I'm getting into. I'm not even bringing this up in like a my Adventism experience caused trauma kind of way, but more actually looking at the healing process of how it is to work with these conditions. I feel shed some light on why it's easier for some people to leave Adventism than it is for others. And and where that comes in is, like I was saying, the healing process. You have to work on rewiring those neural pathways, and depending on which condition you have, the experience of that is completely different. When you have, and I have both, so I've got a toe kind of on each side. But with PTSD, there you have a solid sense of identity and reality that existed before the trauma, before whatever traumatic event. You've got a solid sense of identity that you can remember, that you can refer back to. You can remember what like. I was a certain person. I can remember what it was like to not have PTSD, to not have been in a car
Right.
accident.
Yeah.
And so when you've got that type of trauma, rewiring your brain involves accessing that former sense of self is kind of a basis for rewiring. You kind of strengthen because your brain doesn't delete those sequences out of your brain. It's overriding them with these stronger ones. So accessing your previous ones and working to build those up so that they're stronger than the PTSD ones that have hijacked your system. That's kind of just, it's a lot more complex than that, but
Yeah.
that's kind of a basic how that works with PTSD. With CPTSD, that's complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it's completely different because CPTSD develops from experiencing chronic trauma over a prolonged period of time. It's not like a car accident where it's just
Right.
you're safe and the next you're not. It's a prolonged,
So this is
like
more
you,
in alignment with someone's feelings through Adventism of that
yeah, you don't have,
long term. Yeah.
yeah, you're jumping ahead of me.
The dripping, sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, you get where I'm
Yeah.
going with this.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have a previous sense of identity that existed without this trauma. It's
Wow.
always been an ingrained part of your system. Your system has been living in this state of hypervigilant protection for your whole life, or for however long the trauma
Mm,
lasted. And that pattern of thinking continues past that. And so healing from that experience is completely different, because that involves rewiring your brain and inform by forming an entirely new sense of identity and a new sense of reality completely from scratch.
yeah.
You don't have that former sense of self to refer back to, and it is so much more difficult because you've got to craft, like, you only know what you know, you're only familiar with what you
Yeah,
like grow up in
exactly.
or
Yeah.
whatever. And so crafting an entire worldview from scratch when you don't know what else is out there is extremely difficult. It's a lot
Yes.
longer, it's a lot more complex, thus the C complex.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so my theory as this relates to Adventism is that those who had a strong sense of identity before Adventism, whether that's they grew up in it but they didn't actually learn the theology until later, or maybe they converted into it at some point but and then later left. But my theory is, like, those who had a solid sense of identity before or without Adventism find it much easier to leave and adjust to life after Adventism than those who
Yes.
don't. They're like the PTSD patients where
Yes.
you've got that sense of self to go back to, but those who were maybe born and raised in it, especially if you come from a really hyper conservative controlling environment, you're going to have a really hard time letting those system go. Like, some, I put on the slide, some may struggle to even consider leaving Adventism because their sense of identity has always been so tied up within
Yeah.
Adventism that they can't even conceptualize life without it. And
Yeah.
you don't know what you don't know, and it's
Yeah.
scary to jump into a void not knowing where you're going to land. And I think that's the reason, or a reason, kind of with the packing and the all or nothing kind of stuff. I think this is also another angle of looking at it, of a reason why people really struggle to leave, or they struggle to adjust afterwards. It's because your
Yeah.
identity is so tied up in being an Adventist, and the degree to which that's true is going to affect how easy or difficult it is for you to leave.
I'm so
Is
glad that you've
my
raised
fear.
that because that was the surprise for me when I left. Like I
Mm,
had fortunately been involved. I've said this many times too, but I'd fortunately been involved with the secular world, lead guitar land. It's different to
mhm,
just loving guitar. Lead guitar is improvisational. It's playing notes that just come out into your brain. There's a skill to
mhm,
it, but there's also a real letting go of it. And there's a big community of lead guitarists that just, we all love Steve Ray Vaughan and Albert King and Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, and we'll talk
mhm,
till the cows come home. And I've been, loosely involved or deeply involved with that community since I was 11 and just loved it. And so I thought
mhm,
I've got a real good, strong identity. I did not expect when I left the church to have that challenged. And yet that
mhm,
was the little surprise awaiting for me.
mhm,
About maybe a year or two in, I suddenly was going, whoa, hang on a second. So I'm so glad
mhm,
you've raised that because I think it's so important for people who are thinking of taking this step of leaving. Just be aware that that might jump out to bite you. And
Mhm.
so, I'm interested, like what kind of how can you prepare yourself for that? Have you thought about that? Because maybe are you far enough along the journey to have felt that happen yet?
Well, I think the well, I'm kind of in the middle of it. It kinda I mean, it's part of the process when you're packing, it's part of the process when you're on the boat. Hopefully when you land, that it might even follow you there. I'm not there yet, so I don't know. But I think just being aware of that and being aware of how much or how little it might surprise you when you're doing that soul searching and picking things apart of how strongly or not as strongly your sense of self and identity and spirituality and all of that is tied up with your membership in the Adventist
Mm,
church and just the yeah and I think that's my part of my theory of why it's can be challenging for the quote unquote gospel Adventists as you call them. I think this is one of the reasons why they might struggle to leave is because they're just so completely enmeshed in that system for their whole life that they just have no concept of what it would be like to live without Adventism, and maybe they don't think
mm,
it's possible, or and maybe they're not even aware of that.
mm.
But that's a little of my theory of why
Yeah, it's
people
great.
find it harder or easier to leave than others.
Yeah. I
And
I, recently, and I've mentioned this on the show, found out that my iron levels were only 5, and you're supposed to have 30 as your lowest. Um,
mhm.
and it
That's not
turns
good.
out no, if apparently if you're that low and you have also the hemoglobin or anemia aspect, which apparently
Mhm,
women have if they've got low iron, that's
mhm.
ready for hospital at that low. But because I
Wow.
didn't have the anemic response, I'm well, I'm fine apparently, but, so I had an iron infusion, last week, I think it was, and it takes 2 to 3 weeks to kick in. Now, I've felt little flickers of that starting to happen, and the doctors think that I've probably had this probably my whole life, just never really diagnosed,
Mhm,
because of
mhm,
vegetarianism,
mhm.
eating too many haystacks and not enough protein and iron in my, and too many gluten steaks instead of real steaks.
Oh, I hate
Anyway,
those.
the point is
I
that
hate
when the
them.
doctor said, "Well, how come are you feeling any what are your symptoms?" And I said, "Well, I lately I've been feeling quite tired in the afternoon and have to have a little nap." And he said, "But I'm talking about
Mhm.
your whole life." And I can look back now and see how it has affected me, but because it was just that's all I knew. I didn't
Mhm.
know any different. I didn't know that my body was being abused by not having enough
Yeah,
iron.
and I
And
think it's
so
important to point out that's not your fault.
yes,
You
exactly.
you can see it looking back, but that's not your fault. You don't know what you don't know,
You don't know
and,
what you
like,
don't know,
once
yeah.
you know better, you do better, but you shouldn't, like, shame or put down yourself for not knowing what you didn't know before.
Yeah, exactly. And it's at that point that I think a lot of the liberal, progressive, revisionist, gospel Adventists are sometimes at. They don't even know that
Mhm.
because it's not their experience, well,
Mhm.
they don't really know because they can't compare it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think it could be part of the reason why. I'm sure it's different for every person a little bit
yeah,
here and there, but yeah. But yeah, just as a final note to just wrap up this first section, this is the
yeah,
end of the first part of the presentation. Let's just be gracious to each other and
yeah,
respect each other's journeys. I think sometimes we, especially in the comments, I'm guilty of this. I feel like sometimes we can have the tendency of trying to pull people to the part of the journey where we're at. Like those of us on the boat can look on the shore and be screaming like, "Come on, you guys! Can't you see the problems? Get on the boat!"
yeah,
And then people on the shore can be screaming at us saying, "Come on, get off the boat! Like Catholicism is the answer, Episcopalianism is the answer,
yeah.
Pentecostal, whatever it is, like we've got the
We
answer over
have the answer. Yeah,
you don't have to wallow around in questions. Like, come join us over here. It's really great on shore. And let's just try to be respectful of each other and
Yeah, yeah.
just acknowledge we're all at different spots, and let's just try to be supportive of that. And I don't think it's wrong to necessarily share those things and share, hey, like, I became a Catholic now or whatever, and it's really empowered my life. Like, I really enjoy the episodes of your show where it's specific people talking about where they've ended up and how they got there. I just find that so fascinating.
Yeah,
It's fascinating because I love learning how people think and
yeah.
hearing people's stories. And so I think it's perfectly valid to point those things out. But maybe let's just try to not not be so aggressive about it to the point where we're no longer supporting people if they're not in our particular place.
Yeah.
I think it's valid to say, hey, we're on the boat. There are so many problems in Adventism. It is worth getting on the boat. Like, just leave already. I think
Yeah,
especially those of us on the boat can look at the gospel Adventists, can look at the people on the shore and
yeah.
say, just pack already. Like, we'll help you. Come on. But
It's funny because,
anyways,
every
yeah.
day people write to me and some people say, "Oh, you're not telling people to leave, you're just kind of leaving it up in the air." And then other people
Mhm.
say, "Oh, you're trying to tell us to leave." It's like the
No,
exact
it's
same opposites, being
it's
held in tension in my world.
maybe this framework will clear that up for people a little bit of we're not here to push an agenda. And I really appreciate that about this platform and this show that you've built here, is that it's not an echo chamber. You're not pushing a particular agenda. You're not saying, hey, everybody, I've got the answer. Come get on the boat. Everybody leave. Hey, everybody, get off of the
Yeah,
boat. Come join
yeah,
me over here. You're just giving us a space to say, hey, we've all had this experience of coming from the same country.
yeah.
Let's talk about what made us leave. Let's talk about why we stay. Let's talk about where we ended up and just learn from each other. And I really appreciate that about your platform and
Oh,
about
thank
the
you.
people in the comments and all of that. But
Well, I
anyways, yeah,
think
I just wanted to wrap up that
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 part.
first part of the presentation of let's be gracious to each other no matter where we
Yeah.
are.
And Andy Mack kind of highlights that. She talks a bit about some people are in AA for years and end up taking themselves out instead of going back to alcohol. And I think it can be as dangerous when leaving Adventism. And this is why I'm grateful for groups like this,
Mm,
because there's something new now that wasn't around when I left 8.5 years
mhm,
ago. Social media, as disastrous as it can be, has also
mhm.
created a place where people can go, oh, I'm not alone. There are other people that
Yeah,
also are feeling this. Um,
definitely.
yeah. So, yeah, thanks for that, Andy. Well, we're going to have a short break, and then we're going to come back with your specific steps that you took to leave the church. And
Mhm.
I'm chatting with Rachelle Anonymous, and she is doing a great job. She started out nervous and excited at the same time, but I think,
The
and
nerves are subsiding. Still
a lot of
excited.
people in the comments have been saying how well you're doing. So
Oh, thank you.
we, we've kind of been discussing, um, a practical way on how to leave the SDA Church and get your name off the books, which is kind of now what our focus will be after the break.
Mhm.
But you have to set the scene, and you've done that just perfectly today. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Stick around. Go and get yourselves a hot brew,
Get
or
some
a cold
snacks.
brew, or a snack. Yes, and sit down and
Snacks.
enjoy our next part of the program. Look, while you're sitting there, and if you're watching on Facebook, just lean forward and click the like button. And if you're on YouTube, just lean forward, get your mouse, and just click the like button. You'd be amazed how much that helps. And if anyone would like to support what I'm doing financially, you can go to PayPal there, paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music, which was my whole life doing music until lockdown, and now I'm doing podcasts anyway. And I've just had this idea. So Andy Mack is coming on next week to actually leave the church officially during the program. And Andy has been on the show. She's talked about her journey. And I think there's some things Rachelle have said today about, look, it's time to get on that boat. Again, if you don't want to get on a boat, no one's cajoling you to get on the boat. This is for people who have decided they want to get on the boat and leave.
And just
This is how to
how
do
to
that
do it.
if you want to do it. And so if you also, here's my little thing. Here's an altar call. If you also feel that the time's right for you to actually leave, why don't you join us next week? Pacific time, USA would be Tuesday 6 p.m. Pacific time USA, and Australia, New South Wales time 1 p.m. on the Wednesday. So Tuesday evening USA, and Wednesday New South Wales lunchtime. If you feel it's your time to officially leave the church, why don't you join us that day and leave? Join Andy Mack as she officially leaves. You just need to find out where is your membership and an email contact address to send it to. And then during look at the balloons going up. And then during the program, it's a sign party. I don't even know how to do that again. How do you make balloons go? But during the program, why don't you join Andy Mack and actually leave the church officially, if that's what you want to do. No pressure. But it would just be really interesting if people joined Andy Mack next week and just showed some solidarity. Find out where your church membership is, find out an email contact, and we're going to draft that letter. You're going to get ideas of how to do that now with Rachelle in the next part of the program. But hey, it's just an idea that came to me. Yeah, this is
I see some people saying good night. Just for the record, second part is going to be a lot shorter.
It'll be very short. We're going to have a 5-minute break, and we're going to be right back with Rachelle. So we will see you in a few minutes. Thanks, Rachelle.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. never be the same. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome back to the second part of today's program. We've done a lot of building up to this part. This is where we really look at the nuts and bolts, the practical ways to leave the Adventist church. And it feels like we have to say this so many times, put in the caveats. We're really not encouraging people to leave the church. We're just saying if you're at that point and you're not sure what to do, this is what you do. Now, just two quick plugs. I got in the mail today This series here, it's called the 2,300 Year Prophecy. It's a DVD series, and the gentleman who wrote it is Herb Kirsten. I'm not sure why he hasn't put his name on the disc, but he's got his company name on there. Anyway, he's been on the show, and good, he's written me a letter to go with it. He's going to come back on the show just to show everybody that I'm not just one-sided. A lot of people say, "Oh, you only support the formers now." I wanted to say something extra there, but I'll leave it. He's got here, here's solid new evidence that Daniel 8:14 points to a pre-Advent judgment of the righteous. Well, there will be a pre-judgment, might be 2 seconds before the Lord's return or whatever, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be referring to new evidence that supports 1844. Ironically, in the mail today, I also got, and I'm just going to do a little bit of an opening. I've cracked it open. This is the latest volume that Gillian Ford has put together, more about Glacier View, and this is volume 8. And there's the man himself on the cover, Dr. Desmond Ford. And ironically, it's a lot of those who love Des Ford and the message of Des Ford who have stayed in the church who are saying to me, stop attacking us. You're with the formers now. But the irony is that the formers are formers because they were influenced by the Des message, even though Des himself never encouraged people to leave. In fact, he encouraged people to stay in the Adventist church. So, I've been a huge supporter of not necessarily the Des Ford message, though that too, but of his right to be heard. And of all the Adventists since the beginning of Adventism, from Canwright to Ballinger to many in between, and to Des himself, his treatment was just so bad. He was just suppressed, defrocked. I don't know if you know much about Glacier View, but if you watch season 2 or read any of these volumes, and they're nice and thick, they're just full of letters and information, letters backwards and forwards from him to others to him.
It's fascinating.
It's incredible. And what you realize is the central lie of Glacier View is that the church said, and its leadership promoted publicly, they literally said at Glacier View, which was like we call it a kangaroo court, but it was a period of time, a week, where nearly 130 delegates got together to discuss the views that Des was sharing, which were totally opposite to this. That's what's funny about getting these two resources on the one day.
Des, balanced viewpoint each side.
It's demonstrating SDAQ&A in motion. Des was saying, no, you can't prove 2,300 days from Daniel 14, Daniel 8:14. You can't prove it. So anyway, in that week-long gathering, where essentially his ideas were put on trial, he was put on trial, really. But the lie at the center is that the leaders after literally said that the majority of delegates could not find light in Des Ford's views. And what we found out in episode 1 of season 2, a man who was there, who wrote up the consensus document, literally had been someone supporting that notion. In fact, his exact words have been, at Glacier View, the majority could not find light in Des Ford's teachings. He said it. And then when he's retired, he said on episode 1, season 2, Bill Johnson said, no, the majority voted that they could go along with Des Ford's ideas. The majority did support Des. And so what I really want to do is continue to support what Gillian's doing here. There's the 8. I think she's going to aim for 10. And it's important to look at, if you care about Adventist politics and how people can be suppressed, because they did a number on this man that was so unfair. And that's what I hope to continue to reveal, is that, you know what, he actually had a lot of great things to say and bring into the Adventist church. And Motor Sapien adds, look, can you call it a trial when the conclusion was predetermined? Exactly. And Vega points out, Glacier View, the gospel got in the way of Adventism.
That's a great sentence.
Yeah, that's really well said. So
that
look,
happens a lot.
that's a little bit of a off topic, but it's on topic in many ways, because Des encouraged the gospel Adventist, the liberal progressive revisionist, to stay and look for this Adventist gem. And yet 45 years later, the church doesn't appear any closer to accepting those views as a collective leadership. And those who do support those gems and those great views are suppressed so much that they can't shine their light. But they keep saying, they keep offering false hope. Well, I'm going to stay though and help bring about the change. Well, 45 years you've been doing that. In fact, I said to Bill Johnson in my interview with him, he said, I wish Des had just stayed and kept a bit quiet and just slowly pushed his views. Gradually, the 1844 thing would have been seen in a proper perspective. And I said, mate, you've just had 44 years at the time, I think it was, or 40 years. I said, you've just had 40 years of doing just that. And how has it worked out for you? The current leadership, Neil Wilson's son of the day of Glacier View, the president then, now is president, and we've got, there's just as many restrictions upon the freedom of speech with the Adventist Church as back then. How great has that thing worked for you? And to his credit, he was like, yeah, it hasn't really worked. So anyway, it's such a interesting part of Adventist history that the church cannot hide or cover up anymore.
I think they try a little.
They still try, yeah.
In all of my K through university years, I was never taught about Des Ford.
Yeah.
In the Adventist system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is what I've learned about him. I've learned from your show in the last 6 months. I never knew.
Isn't that interesting? That even now, yeah.
As
That
a
is
millennial,
so interesting.
so
Yeah.
I can't speak to other generations, but in my experience, that wasn't ever a part of
around 2014 or 15, I was still an Adventist, and I was chatting to about 20 young Adventists. And I said, just out of interest, do you know about Des Ford, the investigative judgment, Ellen White, 1844? None of them knew anything about it, kept in the dark totally. And often, even now with social media, they keep it in the dark by saying things like, oh, Pete, you're just obsessed, or you just have an axe to grind. They try and invalidate you as a person so that people can't even get to your content. Oh, we can't watch that show, or we can't do this because of that person.
That is the perfect segue into the next thing that I'm going to talk about
Awesome.
on this presentation. Before we dive into the actual 1, 2, 3, 4 steps for getting your name off, I mentioned in part 1, when I was looking for just Googling reasons why people leave the church, it connected me to a research study that the Adventist Church did about why members leave and decide to come back.
Right.
And the system of how they do that, talk about keeping people in the dark and pushing a specific kind of agenda. If you don't mind, I'll just launch into that.
Launch in. go.
Or if
I'm gonna
there were
stop
other things
talking.
you wanted to speak through,
I'm gonna stop
you
talking
set
now.
that up so
And you
beautifully.
I say to my friend, Adrian Anderson, who helps a lot behind the scenes, I said, "This is the show. I'm just gonna sit back and listen and not put my 2 cents in." And,
Mhm.
he laughs and, yeah, well, good luck with that. But hey, I'm who I am. I'm me, whatever.
I think the discussion is just what makes this great,
It's
in
it
my opinion.
Yeah, to me,
Um,
it's a conversation. Yeah.
yeah. But anyways, yeah, you set that up so beautifully. So if the audience will allow me this brief little rabbit trail, like I said, this came up for me when I was Googling reasons why people leave. And this is going to be really brief, just a couple slides. And then I've got one at the end if people want to take a screenshot of all the source material that I found on this and they want to look it up themselves. That'll be on the screen for a second too. So yeah, while I was looking up reasons why people leave, this study came up, and I'm just calling this like what are Adventism's assumptions about why people leave? And it linked me to this survey study that happens back. It looks like they initiated it in 2011, and they actually did the study between 2012 and 2013. And at the end of that, in 2013, they had a summit where they looked at all the data they collected and then drew some specific conclusions from that. So just to summarize briefly what I found, in 2011, the General Conference decided to conduct a survey study about why members leave and return to the SDA Church. And I found like 5 different PowerPoints, a couple different PDFs, like a whole bunch of different material from this study presented at this summit with all of this information on it. And like I said, I'll link that at the end. But one of them said kind of the reason for the study, the hope was to identify areas on which to focus the church's nurture initiatives. Like how can we work to better take care of our members so that they don't want to leave, or how can we better draw members back? This is kind of the background of why this study was initiated.
Right.
And just some general information. It was developed and administered by two kind of groups working together: the General Conference Nurture and Retention Committee, and the Office of Archives, Statistics, and Research, or the ASTR. Which, side note, if anyone for any reason needs to look up some sort of statistical numbers information on the Adventist Church, this website is fabulous. This is such a good resource. It has information going back, I think it was all the way back to like 1913 or something like that. It's got all the numbers all in one place. You can search for specific things in specific areas. Anyways, it's a great resource.
Hmm.
If you need to do research, use it.
Right.
Anyways, so that's who kind of formulated this study, came up with the survey. And this study, this was hilarious. It was conducted worldwide, minus Asia and the Pacific. Which by that I assume they mean the Pacific Islands. It didn't
Eh,
say why.
they would
I don't
they
know.
would mean
They-
also Australia and New Zealand because we're the South Pacific division here.
oh,
So it would
okay. I
mean
didn't know
minus
that.
us as well, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Well, I don't. It didn't say why. I couldn't find a reason, whether it was logistical or they just opted out. I couldn't find out, but I just thought that was funny. Of let's. This is worldwide, except the largest continent on the planet. But anyways, and two different. So the study consisted of two different surveys that they gave to two specific groups of people. The first one was given to members who left the church and excuse me, who left the church and were no longer in attendance of the SDA Church at all. They'd either removed their names from membership or they just gone missing. And they got 415 surveys back total of members who had left and hadn't come back. And then the other survey in tandem was given to members who had left the church for a while and then eventually came back. and they got 370 of those. And the numbers across the different reports that I was looking at varied slightly. Some they said that a total between 925 and 1,053 of these surveys were conducted. Um, it varies, but that 785 of them were deemed usable. It didn't say why the others weren't, but anyways, and that the numbers bothered me, so I looked them up. And just to put this in perspective, in comparison to the number of surveys that they did, at that time, just in that 2-year period between 2013 and 2012, 457,847 members of the Adventist Church worldwide were reported as dropped, which means their membership was removed by request. They took their names off of the books. And 513,827 members were reported missing just in that period of time when they're conducting this survey. And so if you take the number of surveys that they actually did out of the number of people who actually left, if you don't count, like, don't even count the ones who are just missing, who didn't take their name off the list. If you only count it from the number of people who took the name off their list within that year, or those 2 years, less than only about 0.23% of ex-members were interviewed for this survey, half of which were people who had come back to the church later. So
Interesting.
to put the I was shocked looking this up, but just to put this in perspective, this is such a teeny tiny little study that less than 0% of the people who left within that year, and the study doesn't say that they only talked to people who left that year. Like, people left before that too. Like,
Yeah.
it's such a tiny amount.
Yes. Tiny
And
amount in a tiny window of time.
I just thought, why where are these numbers coming from? And one of the documents I was looking at outlined actually the survey procedure that they went through to conduct this study. Basically just, oh, my numbers got out of whack. But anyways, just 4 easy steps. First, the chair of this committee took these surveys and briefed all the different divisions about the division leaders on the purpose of the survey, and they handed it to them. And then those divisions translated those surveys, into whatever language it needed to be translated into, and then arranged for them to be distributed and collected. And here's the interesting part. These divisions took these surveys and assigned constituent unions to survey 5 individuals, 5 in both categories, 5 who had left the church and not come back, and 5 who had left the church and then later came back. And then, the last step, collect all of those, submit them back to the committee to be compiled and analyzed. So again, putting the numbers in perspective, using my own conference, where I come from, grew up in the North Pacific Union Conference in Washington State. So I looked up all these stats online. In 2012, my own conference, if they were involved in this, at that time, they had 443 different churches under this conference, and they reported a tiny bit, like 1,516 members who either dropped or went missing just in 2012. And of those 1,516 members, only 10 of them were interviewed, like 5 of which who left the church and 5 of which who came back, which is 0.6%
Wow.
of that whole. Like, this is a tiny number.
Mm.
And they were hand selected by
Yes.
these pastors specifically, and which is just wild to me. And unfortunately, when I was looking at all of this, I tried to find a copy of the actual survey, just hoping I could find a PDF or whatever. I couldn't find one. If anyone watching this was a part of this survey and has a copy, let us know in the comments. I would love to see it. I couldn't track it down. I could only compile this information off of all of the reports that were collected from this data. But anyways, it is just wild. But the
Incredible.
part of the study that came up when I put in the search terms of why people leave was this particular part of the survey. Here's a screenshot. I'm not going to read through all of this, but these are the 19 different sections that were on this survey that were conducted as personal interviews. And if feel free to read through them all, take a screenshot, read it later. A lot of it is demographic information. But the part that highlighted and connected it to me on Google was this section of 20 possible reasons that triggered the decision to leave the SDA church. And what they did was whoever was in charge of this sat down and said, okay, what are the 20 like most likely or maybe the top reasons why we think people leave the Adventist church. Let's make this easy for people. Let's put it as a multiple choice and ask them to rank based on the different charts I've seen. It looks like they asked them to rank these 20 different aspects as the primary, secondary, and tertiary reasons that influenced why they left the church. And I'm just going to show you the list of the 20 things, and it is just absolutely wild because they completely stack the deck to absolve Adventism of
Yeah.
any responsibility of losing these people. But here, check this out. This is absolutely wild. So here are the 20 reasons, and they were put in different orders on these different slideshows that I found. I just threw them up there in alphabetical order. So I'm just going to read through them. So these are the 20 reasons why the Adventist Church thinks they're prescribed reasons of why people leave their church. Conflict with denominational authority, which is a little bit vague. Conflict with other members.
No.
Conflict with a pastor. Death of other family members. Death of parents. Decisions made by higher leaders. A dislike of preaching. Dislike of the worship styles. Divorce. Doubts about Adventist doctrines. Doubts about Christianity. Doubts about the existence of God, high level of conflict in the local church. Not sure how that's different from conflict with other members. A lack of friends in the church, marital difficulties, moved to a new city or church, which is a little convoluted because those are two different things. An other category, and other family conflicts, pastor moved to another congregation. And this one was my favorite. Perceived hypocrisy in church members, in other church members, which, by the way, was the top ranking primary reason why people left. This isn't, and not just hypocrisy, but the way they worded it, perceived hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And just side by side in the next column there, you'll see I put like a little analyzation of, is this the church's responsibility? Like, can you point to the church and say, this is your fault? This reason is your fault. And only one of them is an affirmative yes, that the
Yes.
doubts about Adventist doctrines, the church, they're the ones that, officiate the fundamental beliefs and the doctrines. They can be held accountable for that. The decisions by higher leaders could be argued one way or the other, depending on how you're looking at it and depending on the issue. And the other category is too ambiguous to say one way or another. But just reading through that, it made me so angry because I feel like this is where this attitude comes from of this assumption that people only leave the Adventist church because of personal grievances.
Yeah.
Not because of anything to do with us. It's this attitude of, oh, the church is correct. People just can't get along with each other very well. We're just sinful. Nobody's perfect. Like all this kind of stuff. This to me feels like this is orchestrated this way on purpose. It feels like something nefarious is going on here between the tiny numbers that they're orchestrating and the way that they've organized this section. This was not necessary, but
it's like what a multi-level marketing company would do to defend.
Yeah, and it's so stacking the deck. It just is ridiculous. And if people want to point to me and say, "Oh, that's just my interpretation," that there's nothing going on here. They're not trying to push an agenda. Well, let me show you this.
Exactly. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is kind of one of the final
Amazing.
culminating statements that came out of this Nurture and Retention Summit. Their official statement, a quote about their research findings here. It says, "We acknowledge the findings of the research presented at the Summit on Nurture and Retention in 2013 that while most converts are convicted by distinctive Adventist doctrines, a large majority of those who separate from the church do so because of personal factors rather than doctrinal reasons,
See,
and
that's a lie.
frequently without deliberate rejection of the Seventh day Adventist
What a
Church."
lie.
Yeah, when I
Mm,
read
yeah.
that, oh, like, there it is.
Yeah.
That is the reason for this study, not that. Uh, just ending this off, quick summary. The actual facts are that the data and conclusions of this study are completely invalid. The research is inaccurate. Half of 0.23% cannot accurately represent a whole. Like this is just not a valid sample size to make these kind of majority conclusions and statements out of. If they had organized this differently, if they had not made it multiple choice, if they had just left a box and said, "People, tell us why you leave," and then compiled their data, if they had sent it out to everyone that they had contact information for who's left the church or gone missing, and then and then drawn the data out of however many they got back rather than hand picking people, like that would have been a much more valid way to do
Yeah.
this research and to
Yeah.
draw conclusions. Then you could have said, "We sent out this many, we got this many back, and here are the results, let's analyze them." Instead, they kind of gave them the things,
Yeah.
the answers they wanted to first, and then just orchestrated the numbers
Yeah.
accordingly. But anyways,
Adventists are nothing but reverse engineering experts.
Exactly, and just yeah, this study was just honestly so obnoxious. Like
It's
and on to my
incredible.
next point, like the selection process for choosing who to survey under this process, it was completely subject to bias. Like pastors or whoever was in charge of picking who to interview, they could have easily selected people who were going to skew the answers in their favor.
Mm.
They shouldn't have been out here handpicking people. And obviously the multiple choice section of the survey, if you'll notice that the reasons on that list are very different from the reasons that I listed on my slide. And I'm not saying that the reasons on there are not valid or that
Mm.
they're not reasons why the church has left. I'm saying it's really unbalanced that of the 20 reasons you state, only one of them is the church's fault.
Yes.
That's stacking the deck. They're
Yeah.
intentionally skewing towards absolving the church of responsibility
Yeah.
and placing the blame on the
See,
members.
that's some very clever politicking right there.
Yeah, it's
Very clever.
yeah, and I summed it up with saying, just concluding my own conclusion is that I don't believe for a minute that the
Yeah.
purpose of this study was to identify areas on which to focus the church's nurture initiatives. I think they kind of had three goals in doing this study. They wanted to falsify inf- data that the church could then use to absolve itself of the responsibility of losing 4 out of every 10 of its members.
Yeah.
And they wanted to perpetuate the myth to current members that people only leave the church for personal grievances, and there's no valid doctrinal reasons to leave the church. Like it's not us, it's them.
Yeah.
And also to dismiss and discredit, kind of what you were saying, dismiss and discredit former members who
Yeah.
leave Adventism
Yeah.
as merely disgruntled
Yeah.
employees who can't get
Get
along with each
along. Yeah. Wow.
other. And you'll see a
Yeah.
little bit of that. There's a little bit of that reaction in my emails back and forth with my church. Of the initial assumption is not that there was something wrong with the church; it was that I had a bad experience. Somebody hurt me. Somebody did something to me.
Yeah.
But and I think this is where this mindset comes from.
Yeah. And the
And
interesting thing is
uh,
the Adventist apologists just parrot all that. And
mhm.
Andy Mack writes, and here it is, "This is the remnant commandment-keeping church."
Yep,
Um,
we were drawing all these big
uh,
conclusions about
yeah,
why people leave on
yeah,
less than 0% of their
yeah,
church body.
yeah,
Of
and,
the number of people who leave, it's
yeah,
yeah.
and Sir Nilo said they should have outsourced this survey to a professional body, if they were gonna be serious about it.
Yeah, that
And
would've yeah, I don't think they were serious about this at all.
yeah, John Kaler
Or if
says,
they were seriously trying to skew things into
"Oh,
their
yeah,
favor.
yeah,
And
double-forked
yeah,
serpent tongue," says, John Kaler. Yeah, wow,
yeah,
that's
and,
mind-blowing,
just
mind-blowing,
yeah,
Rochelle.
just another little thought to put that in perspective, this great quote I heard on YouTube recently, an abuser who spends all of their time avoiding talking about the abuse and only talking about the accuser does not want to empower the victims, they want to silence them. And I feel like that was kind of the spirit behind this study here of they weren't
Yeah,
really interested in why people leave. They just wanted to continue to shut people up when they do leave
so
and just
controlling.
point the blame back on them and say nothing to see here, folks.
Yeah,
It just yeah, to any Adventist leaders or researchers or who might be watching this, like, come on, guys, do better. Like,
yeah,
just this is just not
yeah,
it. This is not the way to do research. If you really cared about why people left, you would do better research into that study.
yes.
But anyways, that's a whole little side rabbit trail. It's just something that I discovered while I was pulling this presentation together that I was not expecting and
No, it's
thought it was worth
amazing. Yeah.
sharing.
I just
Um
want you to read that last, little paragraph again or
Oh,
sentence there.
sure. Yeah, an abuser who spends all of their time avoiding talking about the abuse and only talking about their accuser, the one who's saying, "Hey, you're not doing something right," doesn't want to empower those victims. They want to silence them.
Yeah, wow.
And, just as an aside, I don't know if you noticed, but nowhere in that 20 questions was any form of abuse mentioned, any spiritual abuse,
No, no.
physical abuse, any of which does happen in the Adventist system. None of that was mentioned as a reason why people leave either, and it very much is a reason.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, just I feel like the church, at least in this study and overall, they tend to do this. They point the fingers at the people who are accusing Adventism of problems rather than actually focusing on addressing the problems.
Isn't that
And,
terrible?
yeah, anyways, if anybody wants to look up more of that, go ahead and take a screenshot. Here's all those PowerPoints that I got this from that came up when I was searching this, and a couple of PDFs that go with it, that statistics website, some of the charts that I used on there. And just all of the documents available from that summit are in that last
If
link. If you want to
if
see the whole
you
thing, the program, all of that.
if you are able
Go there.
to, can you cut and paste that into the private chat, and I'll cut and paste it into the chat, is
Oh,
it?
um,
Maybe
if
after, because
I
you don't wanna have you can't do it while you're in PowerPoint, but maybe
yeah, I can do that after.
yeah,
Sure.
and I'll post that during the credits
Yeah.
so that people can still
Um,
have it as part of this show.
mhm. Anyways, yeah, that was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it came up in the first section. I thought people might be interested to see, like, what is the Adventist side of this? Like,
Yeah,
beside my side, what does the Adventist church say why people are the reasons why people are leaving?
yeah.
And this is how they're getting that research. So, anyways, if no did you want to bring up any comments or questions or just plow on
No,
straight to
I think
the last part?
let's go to that part where you actually
All right.
set in motion the steps you
This
took
is
to
gonna be
leave the
quick. Thank you
church.
guys for hanging on this long. I know it's getting late. I'm very wordy, sorry.
No, it's total people
But
know this show's
yeah.
always we just go for it.
Okay, well, here's the nitty-gritty you've been waiting for. What are the steps? How do you actually get your name off of the membership record. And here's another quick, easy screenshot. Sorry, my numbers for some reason have auto-corrected to all ones, but basically there are 4 steps. One is a little optional depending on whether or not you know. The first step is to find out where your Adventist membership is actually located. Maybe you know, if you're really good about transferring your membership whenever you move somewhere, then you can skip that step. You already know who to contact. You just contact the church where your membership is located. If you don't know, I didn't know because I moved a whole bunch of times. I wasn't sure. I got married. I changed my name. I didn't know where it was or what name it was under. You just gotta send out a couple emails. People are generally pretty fast at helping you figure out where that is. And then the second step is submitting a removal request to the church as per the guidelines of the SDA Church Manual, which I'm going to pull up on the screen here in just a second. And then that board has to vote to accept that removal request at whatever the next board meeting is after you send that request. And then lastly, you have to receive notification in writing that your membership has been removed. That is part of the process there. And I will pull up from the manual. Losing my voice a little bit. So I just took a screenshot out of the section of the manual. There's a link to the PDF down there. If you just Google Seventh-day Adventist Church Manual, it pops right up. But anyways, this is from page 72 specifically from the 20th edition and within the section of discipline. And so I'll just read this. Removing members at their request. Great care should be exercised in dealing with members who request to be removed from membership. The church recognizes the right of the individual to withdraw membership. Letters of I can't talk anymore. Letters of resignation shall be presented to the board, where the resignation will be recorded with the effective date according to the resignation letter. Out of Christian consideration for the individuals involved, action shall be taken without public discussion. Highlight that there. Efforts should be made to restore the individual to the church family. And I think you've mentioned before, like in your story, you said, please don't contact me. Like, don't bother. Don't waste your breath. Anyways.
Yeah.
That's
so important to add that.
They might try to say, oh, hey, was there a problem? Can we work it out? That's a part of the process. You can just skip that and say, like, don't contact me. But anyways, notification to those removed from membership. A church removing members must notify them in writing of the action taken, but with the assurance of enduring spiritual interest and personal concern. This communication should, where possible, be delivered in person by the pastor or a board designee. The former members should be assured that the church hopes they will return to the church and that one day there will be eternal fellowship together in the kingdom of God. So that is the official church guidelines. That is the process for how you get your name off of the books. And just out of interest, if you guys are wanting to see an example of how this goes down, I'm going to pull this up a little larger so I can see it because the writing is a little tiny for me to read. There we go. Now we're full screened. I think I can still do the slides from here. Yeah. Anyways, these are the screenshots from my actual emails back and forth between my church to get my name off of the books. If you want to see, hey, this is how my story went. This is what I said. This is what they said.
Yeah, this will be good. This will be good for Andy Mack next week. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome to use this as a loose template if you like. I am by no means the standard by which to do any of this. But just and a lot of what I said actually was on the recommendation of a lot of you guys in the comments. So thank you for that. But anyways, and just for privacy's sake, I've blotted out the names, locations, churches, all of that, because I don't want anybody to get dragged through the mud. I've dealt
Mm,
with online harassment before, which is why I'm keeping my name anonymous. So if you know me, please don't out me in the comments, just because I don't want the backlash. So
yeah,
and I don't want to inflict that on this pastor I was talking to or the church or anyone else. So anyways, just be respectful. But anyway, yeah, so if you want, I'll just go through and read this of how it went. Just it's a real quick back and forth. So basically, just before this, I had sent the little email requesting like, "Hey, can you help me find out where my membership is?" I didn't include that on here, but that happened previously. So I'll just read it. Hi, person. Thank you so much for your email. I apologize for my late reply, which my initial email was in July and this is in December. So that's why it starts like that. Would you be so kind as to pass this message along to the appropriate people? Thank you so much. To the board members of the specific church, after much careful, oh, I still can't read it. After much careful consideration and study, I have decided I can no longer, in good conscience, remain a member of the Seventh day Adventist Church. I am therefore formally seeking to have my name removed from the official membership record. I would like this taken care of during the next board meeting on Monday, December 16 at 7 p.m. That's a little tip. I actually called the church and asked them when the next board meeting was
oh,
so I
good,
could include it into the email. So I did that. As per the church
good,
manual's requirement, see attachment. I sent them the screenshot that I just showed you. I expect this matter to be handled privately, only at said board meeting, and not announced or publicly in any way, as per the church manual's requirements and HIPAA guidelines. I expect to receive written confirmation that my name has been taken from the record as per the manual's requirements, and I requested to receive it by email, basically. I will not be changing my mind and therefore request that you do not waste your time and efforts trying to dissuade me. I am firm in my decision.
good.
Thank you so much for handling this matter swiftly. Please contact me to confirm that you've received this email and that this matter has been added to the agenda for the board meeting on Monday. Sincerely, me.
Yes.
And the very next day, they were very quick. The very next day, I got a reply. Good morning. We received a request to have your name removed from the church books. Let me start, and here's where that reaction comes in. Let me start by saying I am truly sorry if someone in this church
Yes.
or another church or school you have attended along the way has caused you
Yeah.
pain.
Wow.
Religious organizations can be fraught with complexity, and I know just how painful and difficult it can feel to stay.
Yeah.
Secondly, I would never try to twist your arm into staying, but I am open to further conversation if it would be helpful to process any of this. It sounds like it is a decision you have wrestled with for some time, and I very much respect the inclination to follow your conscience. I really appreciated that. We will present your name to the church board meeting on Monday, and we'll let you know when that's all been taken care of, basically, blah, blah, blah. Lastly, please know that you are welcome here at any time. We wish you well and we honor your decision, excuse me, and your privacy. Please let me know, if there's anything else, any questions. Wishing you peace and everything good. The name of the particular pastor. And because they were so fast to reply to me and so kind, I decided to write back because this particular church turned out it was my membership at. Oh, I forgot to include that I was baptized at 15, just before I left to go to that high school, and so the church that I'm mailing with is my hometown church from at that time. And I forgot to mention that I got baptized because I thought that I was gonna be the only one not baptized at that school, and I didn't want to be the odd man out, so that's why I got baptized the
Yeah.
first time. And then the second time I got baptized again my senior year at the end of high school because they had convinced me that the first time wasn't good enough. I wasn't really a real Adventist because I wasn't doing Adventism the way they were. They had it right, everyone else had it wrong, and so I got baptized again. Anyway, I forgot to add that to the first part. Oops. But anyways, so yeah, I was baptized twice as a member. So
Yeah,
got
wow.
2 baptism certificates. Anyway,
Doubly saved.
yeah, so I forgot to add that. Anyway, so that's who I'm talking to. And I had not had issues with this particular church, so I wanted to assure them of that. So yeah, I wrote them back. Thank you so much for your email. If you like, you can also read this next message to the board. I appreciate you taking care of this matter for me so swiftly. Please rest assured that my decision to leave is not due to my time spent attending this church, nor as a student at the university that was attached to it. I have many wonderful memories here that I will cherish always. Rather, I am choosing to leave for doctrinal reasons. A deep dive into exegetical Bible study, Christian history, SDA history, and the writings of Ellen White over the last 8 years has led me to conclude many of the fundamental beliefs of Adventism do not align with Scripture or the gospel. I cannot, in good conscience, remain a part of an organization that I believe has deliberately deceived people and continues to present a false gospel message to the world. Please know that my leaving the SDA Church does not mean I am leaving Christianity. On the contrary, I feel that I'm beginning to discover real faith for the first time. I don't know where I belong yet, denominationally speaking. I still have so much to study and learn, but I'm excited to see where God leads me. Thank you for handling this situation with so much care, respect, and kindness. I have heard horror stories from others who have left their churches and were not treated well. I'm grateful to you for making my exit such a smooth and gracious experience. And then I just made a little note that I'd changed my mind. I decided I did want the letter in writing as well as by email. Um, yeah, and to that, they just did a quick reply, "Thank you for sharing so candidly with me, and I'm open to sharing it with the board this evening as you wish. And blessings to you. So glad your faith is expanding. That's so beautiful. When it's been taken care of, I'll send you an email and send you the letter to the address that I gave at the end of the other email." And then the last email is, "Good morning. We shared your comments with our church board Monday night, December 16, 2024, in regard to your request and to have your name removed from membership at the blank church. The board voted to accept your request for removal and wishes you well. A letter will be forthcoming confirming your removal. Please know that you are always welcome here, and our prayers are with you as you continue the journey towards God. Wishing you peace and everything good." And that was the end of it.
Wow.
And they did send me a letter in the mail. I got a copy about a week later. It was pretty much the same thing that it says in this email here, but that was it. It was a pretty smooth transition.
Yeah.
Thankfully, no, not like the other horror stories that I've
Yeah.
heard
Yeah.
in some
We
of the
reject
comments,
we
people
reject
having
your request.
action and all of that.
Yeah.
So thankfully, my experience I feel like is a pretty good example of how things should be handled.
See, this
As
is
far as the
only just
go.
in December. So
Yeah,
it's so fresh.
this is a month ago at this point. Yeah, I'm honestly, the fact that I'm already on this show so quickly is a bit wild.
Yeah.
But
Well, if things hadn't been
yeah.
going down the way they had been, I was trying to get you in the week after when we kind of did
Mhm,
first start talking, but there was so many things going on here over Christmas
mhm,
that I kind of dropped the ball a bit. But
mhm.
yeah, but here we are. And have you had people, like, what kind of reactions have you had? Because it was very
Oh,
privately done. And this is probably
Yes,
your first big
it's
public
I'm
thing.
the
Sorry to
I'm
better
the
to ask
kind
you
of
next
person.
week probably, but have you had any, reactions from family and friends yet?
Sure. And I am done with the presentation. That's the last slide if you want to take it off the screen.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I had two different reactions. One from myself, and then from other people, and just I'm I've handled this a little differently than I thought I would. I am I'm in no means like a big Adventist celebrity with a big Adventist platform or following or anything like that. So I didn't make any kind of public announcement anywhere. Um and I haven't really made a fuss telling specific people. Like there's a couple like close friends of mine that I told specifically who are either on the journey with me or just my support system. And I've told them and they've been really supportive of me. I kind of I didn't make a slide for it, but I kind of charted out. I was expecting there's kind of a spectrum of reactions I was expecting, starting at the top of like some people would agree with me and then cheer me on like my cheerleaders and say, "Yeah, we support this and we're with you." Other people who like support me but agree to
Yeah.
disagree and say like I don't believe the same thing you do, but I'm going to support your journey anyway. Um, some people I didn't bother to tell because I felt it would be completely neutral. They wouldn't care one way or the other. And then the scary ones are the ones where they disagree and they don't support you, but in kind of a not in an active way, just in a low like I don't agree, I'm disappointed, that kind of thing, versus other people who and they're not going to try to convince you that you're wrong or convince you to come back. And then like that lower level of people who are going to be mad, who are going to be mad at me for leaving, who are going to say, no, come back, you're wrong. And they're going to try to force you to come back or twist your arm or whatever. That's kind of the range of reactions that I was expecting. But to be honest, I haven't told a
No.
lot of people. This
And it's
this is
over
the
Christmas period.
this is the most
Yeah.
people I've told
Yeah.
coming on here is the biggest step
Yeah.
that I've made. And I changed some of my thinking on that. I originally didn't want to come on the show until I had like almost come out of the closet, so to speak, to everybody in my life who mattered to me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that that idea was coming from that Adventist mindset of having to have an answer and a defense for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And like, if I'm going to make a statement against the church, I better have all the
Yeah.
answers stacked up to defend myself, ready. And I just kind of let that go. And I said, I'm going to tell some people specifically that I want to, and other people, I'm just not gonna bring it up, and if it comes up in conversation, if they discover this interview and they wanna talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it and answer questions, but for different friends or family members that I know it would cause them a lot of pain or they would be really upset, I've just decided, like, I'm just not gonna tell them, I'm not gonna poke the bear, I'm not gonna go around causing stress because I used to be in that
Mm.
mindset, when I was in high school, like, at the peak of my indoctrination, brainwashing, whatever you wanna call it, I was very much in that mindset of anyone who is not a part of this group is not saved, and that caused me a lot of
Yeah.
stress and just worry about particular friends and family, and it comes from a place of genuinely caring about people. So I'm in no way saying that to like besmirch people who would react badly to me leaving, but it's because I understand very vividly where that reaction was coming from. I used to have that reaction towards
Mm.
other people of the immediate, "Oh, don't leave the church. If you leave the church, you're losing your salvation." I understand that mindset. That used to be my mindset, and I don't want to go out there and actively cause that stress
Mm.
for people. If it comes up and we have to deal with it, I will. But at the meantime, and just in general, which is odd for me saying this since I'm on this show right now in such a public forum, but in general, I'm just a spiritually private
Mm.
person. Which is one of the things I struggled with being Adventist, where everything is very like out for show, and everybody wants you to pray out loud and be involved in all these ministries and things. And I'm just more of a private spiritual person. I really only share that side of my life with a few people. Um, to just being on this show
Yeah.
in well, this is probably the most public statement of faith kind of stuff I've ever done, other than the media productions I was involved with at my particular high school,
Yeah.
which is still being used to this day as Adventist propaganda
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I've got
advertising. But
some music out there on Hope Channel.
yeah.
It's still being played.
Mhm. But
Um,
yeah, that
y
and I think part of I had a little bit of an easier time of it too due to COVID because,
That's interesting.
we were actively going to church up until 2020 when things shut down, and then in the middle of that, in July, my job that I worked at this particular store, and they decided to liquidate and close down, and so we moved to be closer to my husband's work 'cause at the time, he was having to commute 2.5 hours a day,
Mm.
and so we decided we'll just move closer to his work. So we left the church community that we were attending. And when we moved, everything was still shut down. So I didn't ever really get plugged into a new place over here. Like we visited a few places, but they hadn't really opened up yet. And by the time they did, I was kind of done.
Right.
So I didn't have like an immediate local community that I felt I had to go kind of like you put out the announcement like, hey, this is my last Sabbath. I didn't really have to do that because I wasn't really plugged into a
Right.
specific place at
You'd
that time.
already slowly kind of, and with COVID, like you say, you're already not
Yeah, it
having to
it
be
kind
there.
of made it easier for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
are you finding that your immediate family, how they are responding to this? In what kind of way?
Well, I don't wanna share too much personally about my immediate family and their reactions just because again, like, I
Yeah, of
believe everybody has the right to tell their own story.
course, I
I don't
respect
wanna
that.
usurp that and spread things around, but my personal family is an entire spectrum of
Right.
faith. Like, there are Adventists, there are Catholics, there are non-Christians. There is just a huge variety of just in my side of the family that is not all completely Adventist. I'm not one of these, "I'm a 6th
Mm,
generation, blah, blah, blah." Like,
mm,
yeah, just, I mean, my parents raised me as Adventist, and the way they don't really I don't think it's wrong to just say they don't really practice anymore.
yeah.
It's not something that we really talk about because their journey with that happened while I was at this high school, ironically, and so I just wasn't there. I don't It's just not something we talk about, so I
Mm,
haven't bothered to bring it up really with a lot of my immediate family because it's
mm,
just not a subject we really speak of,
mm.
but and I don't wanna say any more than that
Yeah, I
about
understand. That's
about
fair
them
enough. Yeah.
specifically, but I mean, I haven't had any major catastrophes, if that's what you're asking.
No, 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 not at
Um,
all. No, I wasn't even
no,
really
I would
trying.
say the majority don't know and probably wouldn't care.
Yeah, yeah.
But, the other side is a different story, but
And I
yeah.
think, what is going to be, and it's already visible right now, appreciated in this particular group, within a group, is that a lot of people who have been sharing your journey have been yearning to hear from other people that are going through this. A lot of people
Mhm.
have left years ago, and they kind of share
Mhm.
their story, which I love to hear. There's a lot of people that have stayed in the church. I love hearing their story. But
Mhm.
what I've loved about today, and the authenticity and honesty and transparency that you've been willing to share, is that this is now something that people who are going through this right now can have that simple feeling of, hey, I'm not alone. I can
Mhm.
reach out to someone. There's people in this group that they can reach out to. Um,
Mhm.
I think that's going to be a
Yeah,
really
and
valuable
maybe I can be an example of a slightly different version where
Yeah,
if if the reason holding you back from leaving is because you feel like you have to announce it to the whole world, you really don't. If you
no,
don't want to, you're not beholden to everyone else's opinions.
exactly.
And,
And in
like
fact, that's one of the things we can share, that if you do step out, like I've
mhm,
noticed more recently for me, is you've got your first wave of people that attack, and you can engage with them, and
mhm,
often you can have them on side, because they respect where you're coming from and you have conversations. But there's another wave of people behind that. They just see the fracas going on, and they go, "Oh,
mhm.
what's he involved with that for?" Oh, and someone will just quip, "Oh, he's just got an axe to grind." Oh, so that second
Mhm.
wave of people form a judgment that you're not even able to engage with. And then there's another wave behind that that just totally dismiss you as a person, because they just think, "Oh, he's a bad egg," or whatever. Or
Yeah,
John Kaler has called it a bad Adventist, which is quite a big
which we've
funny
touched
term.
on a bunch of
Funny
those
The funny term over
ideas of
here.
where that
The
comes from.
bad Adventist,
Yeah,
Radventist.
there's a bunch of a
But
bunch of different, creators with similar using that word.
and my point is that if yeah, don't feel that you've got to be shouting a trumpet. I've left
Mhm,
now. Here we go. I can see people that have been on the show that have gone on to some really effective ministries, of former Adventist ministries that they've started, and they're doing
mhm,
powerful stuff. Like Bill Fritz, just
mhm.
writes every week. There's some incredible stuff that he writes, and he's been on the show 2 or 3 times. He's going to be on again in a week or two.
Nice.
So some people, that's their
Mhm,
calling. But I can just imagine that you coming on today, but just coming in the comments
mhm,
each week. I see your supportive comments to other people. You can There's so many things that you can feel called to do, that don't
mhm.
have to be, "Oh, I'm gonna be really, gonna do an answering Adventism style show." You don't have to be
Yeah,
that. You just
I'm
be
gonna
yourself.
send this to a couple people later.
Yeah,
I made my husband go in the other room because I didn't want him to watch.
yeah,
Like, so it made me too nervous. Like, I'm just a private person in
yeah.
general, but, I got some pushback on that when I first mentioned in the comments, several shows ago, that when I came and said, "Hey, by the way, guys, I took my name off the list back in December." I don't remember who it was, but somebody kept pushing at me like, "Well, why aren't you out telling all of your family? What do you have to hide? You should shout it to the rooftops." And like I did when I joined Adventism, I let everybody know. And I think that's the key is people coming from that Adventist perspective maybe don't understand that my leaving and sharing my story, my decision is not an evangelism attempt,
No, no.
if that makes sense. Like, I'm not out here saying, "Hey guys, I left and everybody else should too, and wow, my
Yeah,
life is better after leaving," which it is. I can touch on that for a second if you want to hear
yeah.
what was my own reaction.
Yeah,
How did I feel
we have
actually
to
having it
definitely
done
have
with?
that. We definitely
But
have to include
anyways,
that.
just yeah, just I wanted to just say for those who push against that and and were coming at me specifically of saying, "Well, what do you have to hide?" Like
Yeah,
it's not about hiding something. I'm no longer in the business of trying to persuade you that I know all the answers. I'm out here saying, "Hey guys, I left this system because it doesn't have the answers. I don't have the answers yet. I don't think I'll ever have all the answers. I'm hoping that I find enough of them to land somewhere else someday."
yeah,
But that's not really a point, and I think people who haven't gone through that, or the person coming at me who converted and wanted to share with everybody, like, I mean, this is my version of sharing with
Yeah, yeah.
everybody, but it's just it's not the same thing.
No.
It's just not the it doesn't have the same spirit behind it of, I'm not out here telling people to leave the Adventist church because that's how you get saved, or
No.
join the Adventist church because that's how you get saved. It's not that. I'm just sharing my experience.
Yeah, and ironically,
And
I'm
helping others who want to do the same thing,
yeah,
hopefully.
yeah, exactly,
But
yeah. Ryan Day has got a question. You did answer this generally speaking, but he's
mhm,
wondering if you could drill down a little bit on it. He says, not sure if you've said this already, but which doctrine or teaching was the tipping point? Because you mentioned doctrine was the thing.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
what was the tipping
um,
point that led to your decision to disconnect? What and which doctrine?
yeah, well, I can briefly mention the first, like I mentioned, the first thing that got me a wake-up call wasn't a specific doctrine, it was a circumstance and a tragedy. But when I did look into the doctrines, kind of the two big ones that were the tipping point for me, were Ellen White and, uh, the investigative judgment.
Yeah, yeah,
It wasn't 1844, it wasn't all the prophecy stuff. I haven't really looked into a whole lot of that yet. I hope to eventually. Like, I'm still sorting through my luggage, so to speak. But those were the things where I just, and I think that's unique to my experience, maybe, maybe not, but in my experience at my high school, like, the majority of my deep, deep theological understanding of Adventism was so completely grounded in Ellen White that when I was in college and after I had that aha moment, I came to a conclusion shortly after where I realized, excuse me, I can't defend a single, like, I don't know how to defend a single Adventist doctrine that I believe without appealing to Ellen White.
wow.
And I'm not out here saying you can't. I'm not saying you
No,
can't defend some of these things using the Bible, only I haven't dug through all of them. But
yeah,
but at that point I had realized this is not a healthy balance. This isn't good. This doesn't work in the real world. When I leave this little Adventist bubble, which I was starting to, leaving college and going out into the wider, workforce and stuff, this doesn't work. You can't try to convince people about Ellen White first in order to convince them about all these other things. Like, it's just that you can't, like you said, reverse engineer it.
yeah,
And people can point to even quotes that Ellen said of, "Oh, don't quote me, quote the Bible," all this kind
yeah,
of stuff. Well,
yeah.
I
Put
took
me
that
in the
literally
background.
and I said, "Okay," and I threw Ellen White onto a shelf for several years and didn't even touch her, and said, "Okay, I'm gonna look at this from just the Bible." And later on, that and out of that came my issues with the investigative judgment. And it's not even so much the end of, I see some comments going in there about, like, scapegoat and sanctuary, that kind of stuff. It wasn't even that side of that doctrine that bothered me or that I really cared about. It was the all of the last generation theology that
Yes,
I had been so indoctrinated with, and
yeah,
just realizing that pushing it so far to the point where you don't need Jesus anymore. You're supposed to be perfect without Jesus because
yeah,
he's coming down to earth and he's in airplane mode, whatever, you can't reach him
yeah.
for some reason. Like,
Do not
that's
disturb
how I think
button.
of it. And that's how I always thought of it. Honestly, if like something happens, there's like, turn off all your electronic
Yeah,
devices. You can't talk, make phone calls,
yeah,
whatever. Like
yeah.
that kind of a thing. Maybe that's changed now in the tech age, but
No, it
growing up, that's how it was.
yeah,
But and anyways, just pushing it to the point where if you're telling people they need to work themselves to be perfect so that they can stand before God without a mediator, you no longer have
yeah,
Christianity, you have something else. You have something that's a lot closer to Mormonism. The more I study and learn from them, I saw some comments mentioning, like, Mormon
yeah,
Stories podcast. I love them so
yeah,
much. I relate to them so hard.
yeah,
It's
yeah. I've
just
been trying to
but,
get some, former Mormons on the show. It's difficult to get them on. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, they've kinda got their own thing too,
Yeah,
but
it's
I
just yeah.
definitely can get some of them, but I really feel like the more that I study and learn about Mormonism and Adventism and where they popped up in history and just their theologies, the more, I believe Adventism has more in common with Mormonism than it does with Christianity,
Yeah,
to be completely frank. Like, kinda
very similar.
the if you summarize Mormonism with one of their verses, I don't remember the source, but it's like their version of John 3:16 kind of is that we are saved by grace after all we can do.
Yeah,
And I feel like the Adventist system believes that, but in reverse of
yeah.
like Jesus saves us. He pays the little entrance fee, gets us into the club, and then it's our job to keep paying
Yes,
those dues and maintain that membership.
yes.
I feel like Adventism is Mormonism in reverse, really.
Yeah, yeah, very
But
similar.
yeah.
Um,
And,
oh, wow.
yeah, so that was a big one, and then and some of that then kicked me back to Ellen White, and just I read a lot of information on her, and, particularly, one book that was really helpful was, it's called Whitewashed. I meant to have the copy sitting
Yeah.
next to me, I
Well, that's a
forgot.
another little announcement I'm about to make, so
Oh, yeah,
we'll
that
do that
go
in a
ahead.
minute. No, you
Yeah,
finish
I'll
off
go
your
back
train
to it.
you finish off your train of thought, and then I'll
Oh,
share
okay, sure. Well, basically, that book, it's really similar to the White Lie. The White Lie focuses primarily on the plagiarism aspect, whereas Whitewashed, it touches on plagiarism, but it also touches on a lot of other things of
Mm,
like, did she claim to be a prophet or not? And did
mm,
her prophetic predictions come true or not? And just all of these other issues with Ellen White, where she just so clearly lines up as a false prophet
yeah,
according to the scripture. And it just breaks those down so well. And for anyone who would accuse me of, oh, you read an Adventist book, or an anti-Adventist book, and now you're leaving, I
yeah,
did my due diligence, and I didn't just take that book at face value either.
mm,
I read it through once to get the whole gist of it, which was convincing enough in itself. I'm reading it through a second time and going through to every Ellen White quote they use and fact checking it
mm.
and looking up the context and making sure it's used correctly and all that kind of stuff, because that's the next thing people are going to scream is context, context.
Context, yeah, that's the
But
big,
which they
George
only do
Knight. George Knight helped
interchangeably,
bring
right?
that one into play.
But and I'm finding that if anything, this author was completely generous
Yes, yeah,
towards Ellen White. When you look up the snippet that they used and
yeah,
look up the fuller context, it gets even worse. It just yeah. Anyway, so those were the two really big doctrinal things
yeah,
for me, where Ellen White really being the biggest one, because if I'm not going to believe in Ellen White, why on earth would I be an Adventist? It
yeah,
makes as much sense as saying I'm not going to believe in Joseph Smith, but I'm going to be a Mormon. Like, why? You
yeah.
can't. It's
I
just
know, yeah,
you
yeah,
can't. It just, and I maybe other people are more comfortable with living in cognitive dissonance
yeah,
and cherry picking, which they accuse us of doing. But
yeah,
I can't. I have too much of a strong desire for authenticity, and I can't put my name to an organization that knowingly upholds a false prophet.
yeah,
Is kind of what it boils down to for me, and just other stuff more that I'm learning is just also confirming that from other doctrines in other directions. I
yeah,
haven't like picked apart all 28 of them and know what I agree with and don't, but those were enough for me to
yeah,
say, okay, this is a false prophet, this is a false gospel, I'm out.
yeah,
So
yeah.
hopefully that answers I forgot their name, whoever's question that was.
That was, someone, Ryan. Hey, Ryan Day. Thank you, Ryan, for your
Yeah.
question. Now, we're gonna wrap it up in a minute,
Oh, you were going to
but
mention the books.
I'm about to talk about the books,
Yeah.
and, I, um I just want to say how I'm just overjoyed that you've come on the show today. I really
Oh,
appreciate it. And
thank you.
and
You're so
what
kind.
what we're about to say is that people may get to see you a little bit more on the show. Angela
Yeah.
Lima is watching, and Angela and I, when I interviewed Angela, um, so I said we were talking about books, and I said we should start a like a book review thing. I said to Angela, I'll get you back in a few weeks, but because of her work and times and time zones and whatnot, we just haven't been able to do it. And when I was chatting with you off air, you started talking about books, and you said, wouldn't a book club idea be great? And that got me thinking. So not just a
Mhm.
show on this, but I want to do, and this is the announcement, a regular book club. And Rachelle and Angela is welcome to join when and where she can. Where
Definitely.
every 4 weeks ish, I want to put on a chat where we discuss 2 or 3 books. But here's the thing: I want everyone watching to recommend books that they have found really helpful for them in their journey. Um, and I guess in
Mhm.
this case, we're talking about books that have helped people in the leaving process or made them dig down a bit further. Like, for example, I don't have it handy, but Dr. Gil Valentine has written Ostriches and Canaries, and even though he is still an Adventist and will never
Mhm.
leave and is doing good things within the church, his book really helped me and many other people on the leaving process. So it's that kind of
Mhm.
book that we're going to be looking at. But here's the
Mhm.
interesting thing. Once we do our show, and there will be a shorter show, look at maybe about an hour long, and I've even got a little intro already. I'll just show everybody now. Here's potentially our intro for this series. Here we go. And I need to turn the music up, I think. The music was a bit
Fun.
quiet. But it's going to be called
Love the
SDA
vibe.
Q&A Book Club. And hopefully every 4 weeks we'll get together, Rachelle and I and other people that want to be involved, and we're just going to discuss 2 or 3 books. But here's the exciting thing is when the shorter program is done, we're going to go straight across to Zoom, and actually in a private group, because of copyright, we're going to be reading the books. So it's a proper book club.
Mhm.
So we're going to just read
Yeah,
for
it's
about
gonna be
another
cool.
45 minutes or so. And you can sit there,
Mhm.
because a lot of these books you hear and you think, oh, I'd love to read that, but where can I get it? So we're going to be reading rare stuff. We're going to be
Yeah.
reading
They're out of print, they're
out of
hard to find,
print,
they're expensive.
expensive, and we're just going to sit there, and Rochelle and I and whoever joins us will take turns in just reading that book. And you get to, so it's not necessarily let's now discuss it, but at the end when
Mhm.
it's finished we can have a discussion as well. So I'm
Like
very
a
excited about that. That is,
DIY audiobook.
what's that?
A DIY audiobook
That's right. Yes,
for
yes.
people who can't access the hard
That's
copy.
right. And a lot of people have talked about Whitewashed. There's another one called White Out, which is really good. I thought
Not
maybe
read
they
that.
could be our first 2 books. There's also fantastic one, Pirates of Privilege. There's so many books that we can get
Mhm.
involved with. So that's another thing we're adding. Hopefully those that are watching tonight will be pleased with that. Now, the one last thing I want to say before we say good evening. Oh, Rochelle, can we make that next
Mhm.
week?
Yeah.
I want to do the first one next week. Let's do Whitewashed and
Mhm.
Whiteout, and we'll just both do a little review on maybe 2 or 3 books that we've found very influential. I'll
Yeah,
get two or
I've got a
three.
whole
You get 2 or 3,
stack.
and we'll do that next week. So that'll be um, your evening Wednesday, 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Let me
And for
just
those
grab my
in New South Wales, Australia, it will be Thursday at 1 p.m. So next week, we've already got our program organized.
got it on the calendar.
By the way, tomorrow Michael C is coming on the program. Everybody, he's been in the sidelines enjoying making comments and finally has accepted to come on. So he's going to be on tomorrow. Connie is going to be sharing the gospel message next day. Next week, Andy Mack's going to live on air write her leaving email. The next day, we're going to do our very first SDA book club. We won't start the post-club discussion. Well, maybe we will. See how we go. We might even start next week. And then our gospel message next week is Frank Mirandino. He's going to be doing a 3-part series on Galatians. And I really encourage all those that really want to build this community, our good news fellowship once a week. That's then. And so the last thing I wanted to say is I'm realizing today, Moto Sapiens asked, and a lot of people have asked, I'm realizing that season 2 of SDAQ&A, that was the big one. That was the flagship that really started everything for me. And I'm realizing that it's only available to watch in Facebook. And so many people are now watching on YouTube and they're going, well, we want to see these episodes. But I've got to tell you, because they're already done, to get them up onto YouTube takes me about 6 hours. So I'm doing a bold plug. If you'd like to see those come up, and they are such a powerful series. There's 86 of them in season 2. I have put up about 5, but you times 86 times 6 hours roughly to put them up. Put them up. There's a lot of hours, but if you guys are willing to get behind me with some extra donations, just put season 2 in the donation, paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. I tell you what, or you can, I think somewhere up there in the corner, there's a scan. You can do a QR code. I've got a bit of time this month. I will put a lot of extra time in getting season 2 out there, because it is such a monumental season, not because of me, but because of the people that are on. There's George Knight, there's Bill Johnson, Norm Young, heaps of people that were there. Ron Numbers, Ron Graybill, Gil Valentine, Kendra Valentine. There's so many amazing interviews. Again, not me, them sharing what happened at Glacier View, sharing thoughts on Dr. Ford. It is an incredible series. So if you'd like to get behind me, I love that people support what I'm doing. Thank you. This is like an extra project. So if you write in there at PayPal, if you make a donation, just put season 2, and I will know that that's especially put aside, and I will match the hours that kind of backs. I'll do it for $20 an hour. That's Australian money, so that's about, I guess, $11-12 US dollars, something. I will put the time in, and really, because they're up on a sister YouTube group called Season 2, SDAQ&A Season 2. Anyway, I've just felt inspired today and realized that most people watching have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about season 2. And yet it is the very reason that SDA Q&A took off. So I would love to make that more available to people. So if you'd like to support me, I do need donations for that, though, because it is so time intensive. These shows we get to put several hours a week, but they're live. We chat, they're done. But sitting down, editing, it takes a lot of work. So if you guys would really like to see that, I will get to work on that. Okay, well, thank you, Rachelle. Is there anything you wanted to wrap up or close with?
Maybe just a brief what it feels like to be on the other side of the process.
Yes.
Because it took me so long to actually decide and go through with taking my name off. And I had all these previous ideas of how I thought I was going to feel afterwards. And some of that kept me from doing it for a long time. I was worried about the backlash. I was worried that I was going to have some sort of like, I'm not even sure how to put it exactly into words, but like in my experience, they really, really put the fear of God, so to speak, into me, that people leaving the church meant losing salvation. And I was really worried about if I was gonna feel that way on the other side, and surprisingly not. Like, it was so much more stressful waiting around and not taking my name off of the books, and, like, I used to just have this thing just hanging over me where it's gonna sound a little creepy to say it, but it is almost like I lived with this daily little staff meeting in my head of all of the leaders from my high school that were watching my every move and judging me and judging the choices that I was making, and I could never get them to shut up. And after taking off my name off the list, that issue was just gone. Like, I no longer had I was no longer beholden to Adventism. I no longer had to worry about how I represented it or misrepresented it or whether or not I agreed with it. Like, it's just not a controlling factor in my life anymore. And that has just been so freeing to
Wow.
me. Like, I don't have that staff meeting going on in my head
Yeah.
24/7 anymore. The shackles just came flying off.
Yeah.
It just I'm at so much more peace now, even though I don't know where I'm gonna end up. I thought I was gonna have and I feel like I had more trouble with the idea of uncertainty before taking my name off the list, and now that my name is off the list, it doesn't bother me at all. It's very freeing. It feels like, well, now I'm free to explore everything that I was never allowed to explore. I can
Yeah.
ask all the questions I want. Nobody's gonna get mad at me.
Yeah.
Like, that part of it really surprised me of I thought it was gonna be more difficult to adjust to that than it was, and I still think for some people it will be. But for me, just wrestling with the concept of, "Oh, well, if I leave, then I'm gonna have to admit that I don't have the answers." And now on this side of it, I'm like, yeah, I don't have the answers. Isn't it great? Like,
Yes.
it's not my responsibility
Yeah.
to be the person upholding all these answers. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so freeing, which was surprising to
Yeah.
me. So, hope maybe that's a word for encouragement for people who are on the fence and think it's gonna be really bad. On the other side, it might not. It might not
Yeah.
be. It might actually be way better, which has been my experience.
Yeah. The good
And yeah,
definitely outweighs the bad.
I'm still on the boat.
Yeah.
So, and, I hope I get off the boat at some point. When I do, hopefully this platform will still be around and I'll let you guys know, but yeah, that's in
Yeah.
the meantime, I'm so grateful to you, Peter, for having me on and for just creating this little community here, and grateful for all the people in the comments. I was seeing, I think Moto Sapien was popping up, like, saying, "Hey, what's your email? Can I contact you?" or
Oh,
something
yeah.
like that.
I changed that.
Anyone who wants to contact me, I would prefer that you do it through Facebook. I'm on the Facebook group. I think you can find me searching
Yeah.
me up through there.
Yeah.
Just
Motor Sapien
by
refuses to
Rachelle
go on
Anonymous.
he refuses to go on Facebook, but if he goes back
Um,
to the beginning of the interview, there was a few minutes where when you logged in, your email was on there.
oh, okay. Well, look that.
Yeah.
I
There
don't
you
wanna
go, Motor Sapien.
put it up again and then just
I
get
won't tell
slammed
anyone
with a
else.
bunch of spam emails. So,
Yeah.
yeah, rewind it, I guess. But, anyways, yeah, you if anyone wants these slides, I'm happy to send it to you that way.
Yeah.
Contact me, go through, take screenshots, whatever. Like, other than, like, 1 or 2 photographs and, like, the little background papers that I used that were all, like, free pictures online, nothing's copyrighted, so
Yeah.
have
Awesome.
at
Share it.
it.
Go for it.
You use whatever you find useful, if anything did. Hopefully something
Yeah.
did.
Well, a couple of
Um,
good positive comments to
yeah,
close on. Rochelle, Motor
sure.
Sapien says, "Rochelle, thanks for having the courage to come on. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we have."
Oh, thank
Uh,
you.
No Sunday Law wrote, "Great show."
I love
I
that
love that
name.
name, yeah.
That's
Uh,
great.
John Kaler writes, "Rochelle, you are a gentle rock star. Thanks for your candor and honest vulnerability."
That's
Um,
great. way to put it. Thank you. That's very
Um,
kind.
and lots of good comments. So yeah. So anyway, look, we will leave it there, and
Great.
join us next week. We'll be back with Rachelle Anonymous for our very special SDA Q&A book club. I can't wait for that to kick off. Well, until next time, thank you, Rachelle Anonymous, for a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been
Oh,
such an
see you
honor.
soon.
Bye, everybody.